Hey guys, tonight we are going on a little trip. Not to a cozy cabin in the woods or a quiet beach, but back in time. Back to a world where the line between medicine and magic was, well, there was one. We're journeying into an age where your doctor was as likely to consult the stars as your pulse, and where a common sneeze could spark a full blown theological debate. Honestly, it's a miracle our species survived. You'd be surprised how a simple headache could be a 1- way ticket to some very creative cures. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd also love to see where you're all listening from tonight, so drop your city and the current time in the comments below. It's always amazing to see how this little community spans the globe. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background tone, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Imagine for a moment that you've woken up feeling unwell. Your head is pounding, you have a slight fever, and you feel a general sense of unease. Today, you might reach for some water and an aspirin. But here, in this world we've just slipped into, your first thought isn't about hydration or painkillers. Your first thought is, who did I offend? You're not in a sterile, white-world clinic. You're in a room made of mud brick or rough-hewn wood. The air thick with the smell of wood smoke, dried herbs, and something else, something vaguely metallic and dusty. The first person you call for isn't a doctor in the way we know them, but a healer, and their diagnostic process is a bit different. They don't ask about your symptoms in a clinical sense. Instead, they might ask if you've recently broken an oath, disrespected an elder, or perhaps forgotten to leave an offering for a local deity. This is the foundational belief you're now living with. Illness is not a random biological event. It's a message. It could be a punishment from the gods, a curse sent by a jealous neighbor, or the work of a mischievous demon who found an open door, perhaps your mouth, during an unguarded yawn and decided to move in. This idea that sickness was a supernatural affair with the mainstream medical consensus for thousands of years across civilizations, from ancient Mesopotamia to the valleys of Egypt. Your treatment, therefore, isn't about fighting germs. It's about appeasement. It involves prayers, incantations, and maybe a specially made amulet to be worn around your neck. The healer might draw a complex symbol on the ground and chant, trying to coax or command the malevolent spirit to leave your body. But let's say the prayers aren't working. It's time to bring in a more academic practitioner. This new expert arrives, carrying not a medical bag, but a rolled star chart and a small, polished brass instrument. They believe in a more scientific system. But science here means something very different. Your body, they explain, is not just a vessel for your soul, but a microcosm of the entire universe. And just as the cosmos is governed by celestial bodies, your health is governed by a delicate balance of internal forces. You are a container of 4 fundamental fluids, or humus: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Each humor corresponds to an element: air, water, fire, and earth, and a season, and even a personality type. A healthy person has these 4 liquids in perfect harmony. But you, my friend, are sick, so clearly your humors are out of whack. Your fever, too much blood, associated with fire. Your sluggishness, an excess of phlegm, linked to water. A healer doesn't just look at you, they look up. They consult their chart to see which planets were dominant at the time of your birth and which are influencing you now. Mars, the fiery planet, might be in a powerful position, explaining your fever and suggesting a treatment related to cooling things down. And here's a wonderfully strange little detail from this era. Some ancient Greek physicians, particularly followers of Hippocrates, developed a theory about a condition they called hysteria. They believed it only affected women and was caused by the uterus, get this, detaching and wandering freely throughout the body, causing everything from anxiety to shortness of breath. The prescribed cure? Using pleasant smells to lure the wandering womb back to its proper place. It's a perfect example of how they tried to create a physical explanation for a problem, even if that explanation was, by our standards, utterly fantastical. As you lie there, Listening to this complex diagnosis involving gods, demons, planets, and a cocktail of internal fluids, you realize how tangled it all is. Was your sickness caused by that angry glance from your neighbor? Or is it because Saturn is in retrograde? Or did you simply eat too many rich foods, creating an excess of hot, moist blood? The answer could be all three. And this is where historians still find themselves in a fascinating debate. Was the shift from purely magical explanations to the theory of the four humors a true leap forward in rational thought? Or was it simply replacing one set of invisible, unprovable forces with another? The line between observing the patient and observing the heavens was, for a very long time, almost non-existent. Your fate wasn't in your hands. It was in the stars, in the gods, and in the very liquid sloshing around inside you. So, you are lying there, a vessel full of these mystical liquids. The physician, a man of great learning, and even greater certainty, leans in closer. He doesn't have a stethoscope or a blood pressure cuff. His tools are his eyes, his nose, and this grand, unifying theory that explains absolutely everything. He begins to explain your internal landscape to you. And it's like listening to a weather forecast for your own soul. First, there is blood, associated with the element of air, the season of spring, and the qualities of being hot and moist. In perfect balance, blood makes you sanguine, cheerful, optimistic, and sociable. You're the life of the party, the person with a ready smile. Your cheeks are rosy, your disposition is sunny. It's the very essence of vitality. Next comes phlegm, linked to water, winter, and the qualities of being cold and moist. A healthy amount of phlegm makes you phlegmatic. You're calm, patient, and thoughtful. You don't rush into things. You're the dependable friend, the steady hand, the quiet observer. You're cool and collected, in the most literal sense. Then there's yellow bile. This is the stuff of fire, summer, and the qualities of hot and dry. This humor fuels the choleric personality. You're ambitious, passionate, and a natural leader. You have a quick temper, but you're also full of energy and drive. This is the fire in your belly, the force that gets things done. Finally, there is black bile, the mysterious one, tied to the earth, bottom, and the qualities of cold and dry. It is the source of the melancholic temperament. You are artistic, sensitive, and introspective. You feel things deeply and are prone to moments of sadness. But this also gives you a rich inner world and a profound appreciation for beauty and tragedy. The physician nods, having assessed you. He declares that your natural temperament is mostly sanguine, with a touch of the melancholy, but your current illness, the fever, the headache, is a clear sign that this delicate balance has been upset. Your system is flooded with an excess of blood, too much heat, too much moisture. Your natural cheerfulness is being overcooked into agitation and feverishness. The diagnosis isn't just a label, it's a complete worldview, and the treatment must fit within this framework. Since you are too hot and moist, the solution is obvious. You must introduce things that are cold and dry into your system to restore equilibrium. The physician produces a long, handwritten list. It's not a prescription for pills, but a detailed dietary and lifestyle plan. You are forbidden from eating red meat, bread fresh from the oven, and anything spicy. These are all considered hot foods and would be like throwing fuel on your internal fire. Instead, your diet for the foreseeable future will consist of things like cucumbers, lettuce, and pears, all classified as cold and moist. Wait, moist, but you're ready to melt. This is where it gets tricky. A sort of culinary undisturbed. He explains you need things that are predominantly cold, and if they are a little moist, well, it's better than adding more heat. Perhaps some barley, which was considered nicely drying. You look at a simple cucumber with newfound respect. It is not a vegetable, it is medicine, a cooling poultice for your overheated soul. And here's a wonderfully weird piece of this medical puzzle. How did they classify these foods? It wasn't random. It was based on a combination of observation and pure theory. A pepper tastes hot, so it is a hot food. Simple enough. A cucumber feels cool and is full of water, so it's cold and moist. But they took it further. Some believed that a food's effect could be determined by how it made you feel hours after eating it. For a medieval physician, your entire grocery list was a pharmacy, and every meal was a carefully balanced dose of elemental property. But what about that most enigmatic of humors, the black bile? Here we stumble upon a fascinating question that historians and scientists still puzzle over. Blood, phlegm, and yellow bile can be loosely mapped onto real biological substances. But black bile, medically, there is no such fluid secreted by the spleen or stomach, as the ancients believed. So what were they describing? This is a topic of intense academic debate. Some scholars argue that black bile was a way of describing the dark, clotted blood seen in vomit or feces during certain illnesses, like a bleeding ulcer. Others suggest it was a purely theoretical concept, a necessary fourth component to make the elemental system symmetrical and complete. It was the physical manifestation of sadness, a substance to explain the unexplainable weight of melancholy. The fact that this ghost fluid was a cornerstone of medicine for over 500 years tells you just how powerful a good theory can be, even if one of its key ingredients doesn't actually exist. As you lie there, contemplating your new cucumber minus barley diet, you feel the profound weight of this system. It is elegant, comprehensive, and in its own way, deeply logical. It connects your body to the seasons, your personality to the elements, and your health to the food you eat. It provides a sense of order in a chaotic world. Your fever isn't a random affliction. It's a predictable imbalance in a universal system. And in an age without microscopes or germ theory, this feeling of understanding, of having a map for the bewildering territory of illness, was perhaps the most powerful medicine of all. You are not sick. You are simply out of tune with the cosmos. Your physician, satisfied with his humoral diagnosis, has left you with your new diet of cooling cucumbers. But you live in a world much older than that of the Greeks in their tidy, minus fluid system. Let's rewind the clock even further. You're not in a drafty European room anymore. You're now under the baking sun of ancient Egypt. The air is dry, filled with the scent of the Nile's dark soil and the faint, sweet smell of incense. You are still sick, but here, the explanation for your suffering is profoundly different. The world isn't a balanced system of elements. It's a battleground of gods and spirits, and your body is one of the main arenas. Your fever isn't an excess of blood humor. It's the fiery touch of the goddess Sekhmet in her wrath, or perhaps a restless spirit has taken up residence in your gut. To get better, you need a different kind of expert. You need a priest minus physician from one of the great temples, a man who has studied the sacred texts and knows the secret names of the demons that plague mankind. When he arrives, his approach is part minus interrogation, part minus exorcism. He asks you about your recent dreams, looks for signs of curses, and examines your home for any objects that might be attracting bad energy. Then, he opens his medical kit. It's not filled with star charts, but with papyrus scrolls containing thousands of remedies, a collection of medical knowledge passed down for generations. This is the Abba's papyrus, or something very much like it, one of the oldest and most extensive medical documents in the world. As the physician unrolls it, you glimpse intricate hieroglyphs detailing over 800 prescriptions and magical spells. This is the height of Egyptian medical science. He finds a spell for your specific ailment, let's say, a persistent headache. The treatment begins with a chant, an invocation to Horus or Isis to lend their divine power to the cure. The words themselves are medicine, but that's just the first step. You also need a physical remedy, a potion to be swallowed or a poultice to be applied. And this is where things get interesting. The priest consults the scroll and nods sagely. The recipe for your headache cure might include honey and an antibacterial, which they used effectively, parts of a specific herb, and, let's see, yes, the dung of a crocodile. You hear that correctly. He explains, with perfect seriousness, that the droppings of this powerful, sacred animal will help to drive out the malevolent force causing your pain. This wasn't a one-minus authority. Animal excrement was a surprisingly common ingredient in the Egyptian pharmacopoeia. Donkey, gazelle, hippo, and even fly specks were all used in various treatments. And here we find a bizarre, and frankly disgusting, little piece of their medical logic. Why use something so foul? The prevailing theory is that these ingredients were meant to make the patient's body an unpleasant home for any invading demon or spirit. The idea was to disgust the evil entity into leaving. If the incantation was the polite request for the demon to vacate, the dose of crocodile dung was the eviction notice. It was a form of spiritual warfare fought with the most repulsive biological weapons they could find. But alongside these magical and frankly unhygienic practices, the Egyptians were also remarkably skilled observers. They identified and named different types of injuries and illnesses with surprising accuracy. The papyrus contained clear descriptions of things we would recognize today as tumors, abscesses, and fractures. They had a sophisticated understanding of bone minus, setting and even performed rudimentary surgery. One scroll, the Edwin Smith Papyrus, is a stunningly practical guide to treating traumatic injuries, like those a soldier or a pyramid minus builder might receive. It's almost entirely free of magic and instead focuses on examination, diagnosis, and prognosis. It even includes a heartbreak honest assessment for certain severe head injuries and ailment not to be treated. This was a physician admitting the limits of their craft, a moment of pure, pragmatic science in a sea of superstition. This creates a fascinating puzzle that Egyptologists and medical historians are still trying to piece together. How did these two systems coexist? How could the same healer who wrote an ailment not to be treated for a skull fracture also prescribe a magical spell and a dose of hippo dung for a stomachache? There wasn't a clear line between the rational surgeon and the magical priest. Often, they were the same person. Some scholars argue that the type of treatment depended on the source of the ailment. If the cause was visible, a spear wound, a broken leg, the treatment was physical. If the cause was invisible, a fever, a pain deep inside, it must have a supernatural origin, and thus required a supernatural cure. Others believe they simply didn't see a conflict. To them, the magic and the medicine were two sides of the same coin, both necessary to heal the whole person, body and soul. So you either contemplating your prescribed dose of sacred reptilian waste. Part of you is terrified, but another part is comforted. This isn't just a random concoction. It's a divine prescription, a method tested by generations, backed by the power of the gods themselves. In a world teeming with invisible dangers, this blend of faith and foul minus tasting medicine felt like your best defense. You close your eyes, say a quick prayer to Horus, and hope the cure doesn't taste as bad as it sounds. You survive the magical concoctions of Egypt in the cool, cucumber minus space logic of the Greeks. No. Let's fast forward a few centuries. You're in Rome, the bustling, noisy, and surprisingly smelly heart of a vast empire. The ideas of Hippocrates and the four humors have been adopted, but they are about to be supercharged by one of the most influential and arguably one of the most egotistical physicians in all of history. His name is Galen. You find yourself in his crowded clinic. It's a chaotic scene. People from all walks of life are here, from senators with gout to gladiators with grievous wounds. And at the center of it all is Galen, a man of boundless energy and unshakable self-minus confidence. AGS not just a doctor. AGS a celebrity, a showman. He doesn't just treat patients. He performs public dissections, untold fiery debates, humiliating his rivals with his encyclopedic knowledge and razor-minus sharp tongue. To disagree with Galen wasn't just a professional difference of opinion. It was a sign of your own ignorance. Galen took the theory of the four humors and turned it into an intricate, all-minus encompassing system. He wrote hundreds of books on every conceivable aspect of medicine, from pharmacology to anatomy, blending Greek philosophy with his own hands minus on experience. He was the personal physician to several Roman emperors, and his word was, quite literally, law in the medical world. You watch as he treats a patient ahead of you. It's a masterclass in diagnosis. He doesn't just ask about your humus. He takes your pulse with an almost fanatical focus. He identified dozens of different types of pulses: the ant-like pulse, the wavy pulse, The galloping pulse, each one a clue to the specific imbalance within your body. He examines your waste products with the intensity of a jeweler inspecting a diamond. He is a brilliant observer, a true clinical detective. His primary source of anatomical knowledge, however, came from a slightly problematic source, not humans, but animals. Due to Roman taboos against human dissection, Galen honed his skills on pigs, goats, and, most famously, Barbary apes, which he believed were the closest anatomical match to humans. He was a brilliant anatomist of apes. The problem was, he then applied everything he learned directly to people. This led to some inaccuracies. For instance, he described the human liver as having 5 lobes, just like a pig's ours has 4. He believed the human jawbone was to separate bones, because it is in many animals ours is one. And he described a network of blood vessels at the base of the brain called the retrieval wonderful net, a feature prominent in animals like sheep that allows them to keep their brains cool, but which is completely absent in humans. These errors, born of necessity and assumption, would be copied verbatim from his texts and taught as undisputed fact in medical schools for the next 300 years. To question Galen's anatomy was like questioning gravity. And here's a quirky little detail that showcases his showmanship. Galen was a master of self-minus promotion. One of his most famous public demonstrations involved dissecting a live, squealing pig in front of a captivated audience of officials and physicians. He would systematically cut specific nerve. With one cut, the pig would stop squealing but continue to breathe. With another, a leg would go limp. He did this to prove that the brain, not the heart, controlled the body and the voice, a major point of contention at the time. It was gruesome, it was dramatic, and it was incredibly effective at silencing his critics and cementing his reputation as a medical genius. Galen's influence was so immense that it essentially froze medical progress for over a millennium. His writings were so comprehensive and so authoritative that for centuries, the goal of a physician wasn't to discover something new, but to better understand what Galen had already written. His work became a kind of medical Bible. This leads to a debate that still echoes in the halls of medical history. Was Galen the father of experimental medicine who pushed science forward? Or was he such a dominant authority that his mistakes created a roadblock to further discovery for centuries? The answer, as is often the case, is probably both. He was a brilliant pioneer whose very brilliance made it difficult for anyone to see beyond his shadow. So as you finally get your turn to be examined by the great man, you feel a mixture of trepidation. He grasps your wrist, his brow furrowed in concentration, reading your pulse like a sacred text. He confidently declares you have an excess of blood and a slight caloric imbalance. He prescribes a vigorous course of treatment, a strict diet. Some complex herbal remedies made from dozens of ingredients are practiced known as polypharmacies. And, of course, a therapeutic bloodletting to remove the excess humor. You are in the hands of the master. His diagnosis is based on the best science available, the science of animal anatomy, a complex pulse and an unshakable belief in a system of 4 fluids. For better or for worse, your treatment plan has just been set, and it will be the gold standard of care for a very, very long time. You've been diagnosed by the great Galen. His word is final. His system is perfect. The Roman Empire feels eternal, a bastion of order and knowledge. But empires, like people, get sick and die. Now, fast forward a few more centuries. The world you knew has crumbled. The aqueducts are dry. The great libraries have been burned or abandoned, and the roads are unsafe. You are now in what historians would later call the Dark Ages, or more accurately, the early Middle Ages. You are huddled in a small, damp villa. The sense of grand, centralized knowledge is gone. Galen's complex texts still exist, but they are rare, locked away in monasteries, and often poorly understood or copied with errors. The intricate art of reading a pulse or concocting a 60-ingredient remedy has been largely forgotten. Medicine, for the common person, has regressed. It has slid back from a science, however flawed, into a world of folk magic, desperation, and fervent prayer. You are sick again. But who do you turn to now? The celebrity physician is a ghost of a forgotten age. Instead, you might seek out the local wise woman. She lives on the edge of the village, and her knowledge isn't from books, but from tradition passed down from her mother and grandmother. She knows the herbs that grow in the nearby woods, which ones soothe a cough, which ones ease a fever, which ones can stop bleeding. Her medicine is practical, born of trial and error over generations. But her power isn't just in her herbs, it's in her connection to the unseen world. She might give you a poultice for your wound, but she'll also mutter a charm over it. A mixture of half-minus remembered pagan chants on newly adopted Christian prayers shall tell you to gather the herbs only under a full moon, or to stir the mixture with a specific type of wood. The physical and the magical are once again completely intertwined, not in a grand, philosophical system like the humorous, but in a practical, everyday way. If the wise woman's charms don't work, your next stop is the local priest. He is one of the few literate people around, but his knowledge is of the Bible, not Galen. He sees your illness not as a humoral imbalance, but as a test of faith or a punishment for sin. The cure is not a change in diet, but repentance. He will pray for you, anoint you with holy water, and perhaps prescribe a pilgrimage to a nearby shrine that holds the bone of a saint. The belief was that the saint's relic held residual holiness, a divine power that could radiate out and perform miracles, including healing the sick. People would travel for hundreds of miles, despite the dangers, just to touch a piece of bone or a scrap of cloth associated with a holy person. Here we encounter a truly strange and widespread medical belief of the era, the healing power of stolen goods. It was a peculiar folk belief that an object or medicine would be more potent if it was stolen. For example, to cure warts, you might be told to steal a piece of bacon, rub it on the warts, and then bury it in secret. As the bacon rotted away, your warts would disappear. The logic, as far as historians can piece it together, seems to be that the act of stealing added a kind of forbidden, magical energy to the object. It was a ritual that required stealth and a bit of transgression, which somehow amplified its power. This wasn't mainstream church minus approved medicine, but it shows how far people were willing to go and what strange beliefs could take root when formal knowledge became scarce. This period is often painted as a time of complete scientific stagnation, 1,000 years without a bath, as one historian colorfully put it. But that picture is too simple. The great knowledge of the Greeks and Romans wasn't entirely lost. It was just in hibernation, while Western Europe was struggling. Scholars in the burgeoning Islamic world were diligently collecting and translating the works of Galen, Hippocrates, and other Greek thinkers into Arabic. In cities like Baghdad and Cordoba, this ancient knowledge wasn't just preserved, it was expanded upon. Thinkers like Avicenna ibn Sina wrote the Canon of Medicine, a monumental encyclopedia that refined and organized Galen's work, and it would later become a core text in European universities once the flow of knowledge reversed. The debate among historians today is not whether this period was a dark age for medicine, but rather how dark it truly was, and for whom. For a scholar in Baghdad, it was a golden age of discovery. For a monk in an Irish monastery carefully copying a manuscript, it was an age of preservation. But for you, a common villager shivering with fever in a smoky hut, it was a time of immense uncertainty. The grand, confident systems were gone. Your options were a local healer, mixing herbs and charms, a priest offering prayers and penance, or a desperate hope that a stolen piece of meat might just carry your sickness away into the earth. The world felt bigger, more dangerous, and the reasons for your suffering were once again shrouded in a deep and profound mystery. You weren't out of tune with the cosmos anymore. You were at the mercy of forces you could neither see nor understand. You've weathered the storm of Europe's early Middle Ages, a time of fractured knowledge and folk remedies. Now, the world is slowly beginning to stabilize. Small pockets of order and learning are emerging, and the most prominent of these are the monasteries. Let's imagine you are no longer a simple villager, but a monk living within the stone walls of a secluded abbey. Your life is one of routine and devotion. The day is structured by the ringing of bells, calling you to prayer, to work, and to study. Your world has shrunk to the confines of the cloister, the chapel, and the garden. But it is in that garden that a crucial part of medicine is being kept alive. You are the monastery's infirmarian, the brother tasked with caring for the sick. Your pharmacy is not a shop, but a carefully tended plot of land known as a Pfizer garden. Here, you cultivate a wide array of herbs: rosemary, sage, lavender, poppy, and dozens of others. Each plant has a purpose, a gift from God to be used for healing. Your knowledge comes from a mix of sources. Part of it is the same folk wisdom the village wise woman uses, but you also have access to something she doesn't: books. In the monastery's library, the scriptorium, you and your brothers spend countless hours painstakingly copying ancient texts by hand. Among the religious scriptures are surviving fragments of medical knowledge simplified, often garbled versions of Galen and other classical authors, sometimes condensed into a single page of remedies. You learn about the four humours, but in a much more basic form. You know that fever is hot and should be treated with cold herbs like willow bark, which we now know contains silicin, the active ingredient in aspirin. You learn that poppy can dull pain and bring on sleep, as it's the source of opium. Your practice of medicine is a delicate dance between faith and botany. When a brother falls ill, your first act is always prayer. Sickness is still seen as having a spiritual dimension. Perhaps the brother's illness is a temptation from the devil, or a sign of some hidden sin. You might pray to specific saints associated with healing, like Saint Sebastian for plagues or Saint Lucy for ailments. But after the prayers, you head to your garden. You walk the neat rows of grain, your mind a catalogue of healing properties. You gather the leaves, roots, and flowers you need. Back in the infirmary, a quiet, clean space set apart from the rest of the monastery, you prepare the remedies. You might crush sage leaves into a paste to clean a wound, brew a calming lavender tea for a brother suffering from anxiety, or make a potent poppy syrup for someone in great pain. Your approach is gentle, focused on providing comfort and easing symptoms. The goal is to help the body heal itself, with God's grace. Here's a charming and slightly odd detail about monastic life and health: the rule of Saint Benedict. The foundational text for many Western monasteries had very specific things to say about diet and bathing. Benedictine monks were generally vegetarian, with meat reserved only for the second week. Bathing was not forbidden, but it was considered a luxury and not to be undertaken for the sake of pleasure. The infirmary, however, often had its own bathish. This meant that, paradoxically, one of the perks of being officially sick in a monastery was that you were allowed to eat meat and take a bath more frequently. It was a healthcare system with some very tangible benefits. While the monasteries were preserving this blend of herbalism and classical theory, they also played a role in filtering. Anything that seemed too pagan or magical was often stripped out. The old charms were replaced with prayers. The gods and spirits were replaced by God and the saints. This process of Christianizing medicine was essential for its survival in a deeply religious era, but it also meant that some practical folk knowledge was lost, deemed too superstitious for a house of God. This leads to an ongoing scholarly discussion: were the monasteries engines of medical preservation, or were they places that limited and censored ancient knowledge? The evidence points to both. On one hand, without the monks in their scriptoriums, countless classical texts, including medical ones, would have been lost to time forever. They were the bridge that carried the wisdom of Galen and Hippocrates across the chasm of the Dark Ages. On the other hand, they were not neutral archivists. They selected what to save, what to copy, and how to frame it. Their primary mission was the salvation of the soul, not the advancement of science. Medicine was a secondary concern, a charitable duty. This meant that while they kept the flame of knowledge from going out completely, it was a very small, carefully controlled flame, shielded from any winds of radical new ideas or inconvenient pagan traditions. So, as the infirmarian monk, you represent this duality. You stand with one foot in the world of empirical knowledge, observing how a particular herb affects a patient, but your other foot is firmly planted in the world of faith. You see God's hand in every healing leaf and every successful recovery. You are not a scientist in our sense of the word. You are a caregiver, a botanist, and a man of faith, doing your best to mend the broken bodies of your brothers in a world where a well-mined tended garden and a heartfelt prayer were the very best medicine available. You've seen medicine as a sacred duty within the quiet walls of a monastery. But now, let's step outside again, back into the bustling, superstitious world of medieval society. You are sitting in a tavern, or perhaps in your own home on a quiet evening, feeling a bit sleepy. You open your mouth wide for a deep, satisfying yawn. Suddenly, your grandmother, who is sitting across from you, gasps and quickly makes the sign of the cross over her mouth. Your friend beside you does the same, a flash of genuine fear in his eyes. You have just done something incredibly dangerous. In the medieval mindset, a yawn was not just a sign of tiredness. It was a moment of profound spiritual vulnerability. It was believed that the soul, or the life minus force, resided within the body, and the mouth was one of the primary gateways. When you yawned, you opened that gate wide. This created terrifying possibilities. First, your own soul could accidentally fly out, leaving you an empty vessel, susceptible to illness or even death. It's a strange thought. Your own life minus was literally escaping on a sigh. The second, and perhaps more common fear, was what might get in. The world was teeming with invisible demons, malevolent spirits, and the ever-minus present influence of the devil. A gaping, unguarded mouth was an open invitation. A demon, always looking for a host, could see that opening and zip right inside, taking possession of you and causing all manner of physical and spiritual sickness. This is why people reacted with such alarm. The act of making the sign of the cross in front of your mouth as you yawned became a common practice. It wasn't just a pious gesture. It was a spiritual shield, a symbolic way of barring the door against demonic entry. It was the medieval equivalent of putting your hand over your mouth, though with much higher stakes. This belief that yawning was a moment of peril was just a folksy superstition. It had roots in some of the highest levels of the church. Pope Gregory the Great, who led the church at the end of the 6th century during a devastating plague in Rome, is often credited with popularizing this connection. The plague was characterized by, among other things, intense fits of sneezing and yawning. The Pope allegedly commanded the faithful to protect themselves. A sneeze was to be met with the blessing "God bless you," a plea for divine intervention to ward off the impending illness, and a yawn was to be blocked with the sign of the cross, a defense against the evil that so clearly traveled on the breath. And here we stumble upon a bizarre little detail that takes this belief system a step further. The idea of contagious evil. It wasn't just that your yawn was dangerous to you. It was dangerous to everyone around you. If a demon had already entered someone, their yawn could be a way for that demon to leap to a new host. Yawning was, in a very literal sense, considered contagious. Not in the way we understand it, a psychological or physiological response, but as a form of spiritual transmission. If you saw someone yawn, you were supposed to immediately protect yourself, because a demon might be trying to make the jump. This imbued a simple, sleepy reflex with a heavy dose of social paranoia. This all feeds into the broader medieval concept of disease, which was deeply intertwined with morality and sin. Good health was a sign of a righteous life, while sickness was often viewed as an external sign of an internal, spiritual corruption. An illness wasn't just a random misfortune. It was a narrative. Why did this person get sick? They must have sinned. They must have been spiritually weak. They must have left a door open for the devil to walk in. This belief system had profound social consequences. It meant that the sick were often not just pitied, but also suspected. Their physical suffering was compounded by a layer of moral judgment. This is particularly true for diseases with very visible or misunderstood symptoms, like leprosy or epilepsy. An epileptic seizure, for instance, with its convulsions and loss of consciousness, was almost universally interpreted as a clear case of demonic possession. The treatment would be exorcism, not medicine. The exact origin of the yawning is dangerous belief is something historians still debate. Was it, as the story of Pope Gregory suggests, linked to a specific plague and then generalized? Or was it a much older, pre-Christian folk belief that was simply absorbed into a Christian framework, replacing pagan spirits with Christian demons. Tracing the precise lineage of such a widespread, unwritten belief is incredibly difficult. It seems to pop up in various forms across different cultures. This idea of the breath being a gateway for the soul or for outside forces. It speaks to a fundamental human anxiety about the invisible things that can harm us and the vulnerability of our own bodies. So as you sit there, having just committed a grave social and spiritual faux pas, you quickly make the sign of the cross over your own mouth. A little too late. Your grandmother is still muttering prayers. You feel a new kind of chill, one that has nothing to do with the evening air. You think about every yawn you've ever had, every unguarded moment. It's a heavy burden to place on such a simple human reflex. From now on, you will view every sleepy sigh not as a need for bed, but as a brief, terrifying skirmish in the ongoing war for your own soul. You've learned to guard your yawns against demonic invasion, but let's say that despite your best efforts, you've fallen ill. The local priest spares and the wise woman's herbs haven't worked. It's time to call in a more learned professional, a university-trained physician. He arrives not with a bag full of poultices, but with a collection of charts, books, and complex instruments. He represents the cutting edge of medieval medical science. And the first thing he wants to know is not your symptoms, but your birthday. You are now in the world of medical astrology. This wasn't a fringe belief. It was a core, required subject in the finest medical schools in Europe from the Middle Ages well into the Renaissance. A physician who didn't understand the stars was considered incompetent. The logic was a direct inheritance from the Greeks, amplified through centuries of interpretation. Your body is a microcosm, a little universe that reflects the macrocosmist, the great universe above. Therefore, the movements of the planets and the positions of the stars have a direct, physical influence on your health. The physician unrolls a large, beautifully illustrated chart. It's an image of a human figure, often called the zodiac man. On this diagram, the 12 signs of the zodiac are mapped onto different parts of the body. Aries, the ram, governs the head. Taurus, the bull, rules the neck and throat. Gemini, the twins, controls the arms and shoulders, and so on, all the way down to Pisces, the fish, which governs the feet. This chart is your physician's primary diagnostic tool. He explains that your ailment can be understood by which part of your body is afflicted and which celestial body governs it. If you have a blinding headache, I'll pay close attention to the position of Mars, the aggressive, fiery planet, and its relationship to Aries. If you have a stomachache, I'll be looking at the moon's influence on Cancer, the sign that rules the stomach and chest. But it gets much more complicated than that. He needs to know the exact date, if possible, the time of your birth to draw up your natal chart. This chart is a snapshot of the heavens at the moment you came into the world, and it determines your fundamental constitution, your base humoral balance and your innate weaknesses. If you were born when Saturn was in a powerful position, you might have a natural melancholic tendency and be prone to joint problems and depression. Then, he compares your natal chart to the current position of the stars. The goal is to see if there are any dangerous astrological conjunctions or oppositions. Is a malevolent planet like Saturn passing through the sign that governs your liver? That could explain your digestive issues. This cosmic diagnosis is considered the height of scientific medicine. It's a system of immense complexity, requiring difficult mathematical calculations and years of study. And this stellar influence dictates the entire course of your treatment. The physician consults another chart, a calendar covered in symbols. This tells him the best and worst times to administer medicine. He might have the perfect turbo remedy for you. But if the moon is in the wrong phase or in a bad relationship with Jupiter, giving you the medicine would be useless or even harmful. You must wait for a more auspicious moment when the heavens are aligned in your favor. This brings us to a wonderfully specific and slightly terrifying application of medical astrology, its role in surgery, especially bloodletting. Bloodletting was still the go-minus to treatment for a huge range of illnesses, but a good physician knew that you could not simply let blood any time you wanted. It was incredibly dangerous to perform any procedure on a part of the body when the moon was currently passing through the zodiac sign that governed it. For example, if you needed to be bled from the arm governed by Gemini, but the moon was currently in the constellation of Gemini, your physician would refuse to do it. The belief was that the moon's influence would be concentrated on that part of your body, and the bleeding would be uncontrollable, leading to a disastrous, or even fatal, outcome. Patients were known to consult their own almanacs and refuse treatment if they thought their doctor had miscalculated the celestial schedule. The deep integration of astrology into medicine is something that modern historians look at with fascination. Was this a pseudoscience that held back real medical progress? Or was it, in its own way, a step toward a more personalized and systematic approach to medicine? The debate is lively. Some argue that it was a massive distraction, leading doctors to gaze at the sky instead of closely observing their patients. It reinforced a sense of fatalism. Your health was written in the stars, and there was only so much a physician could do. However, other historians argue that it had some unintended positive consequences. The need to wait for an auspicious time for treatment might have prevented doctors from performing excessive or hasty procedures. In an age where most interventions like bloodletting were probably more harmful than helpful, this forced period of waiting might have given the patient's body a chance to heal on its own. The doctor would then credit the successful astrological timing, reinforcing the system. It was a kind of cosmic placebo effect. So, you lie there as your physician performs his complex calculations. A.G.S. looking at ephemeris tables and consulting his astro. He is not just treating your body, he is trying to align it with the entire cosmos. Your fate, your fever, and your recovery are all tied to the silent, majestic dance of the planets. The prescription you receive will have two parts: a list of herbs to take, and a precise, astrologically determined schedule for when to take them. Your medicine is not just about what, but very, very much about when. Your astrologer physician has determined the perfect cosmic window for your treatment. But before he prescribes a complex herbal remedy or a strategically timed bloodletting, he needs more data. He needs to look inside you, to see the state of your humors directly. And in an age without X-rays or blood tests, the best window into the body's internal state was, well, your P. You are now about to undergo one of the most important and widespread diagnostic procedures in medieval medicine: uroscopy, or water casting. The physician asks for a morning sample of your urine to be collected in a special, clear glass flask with a round body and a long neck, a shape specifically designed for optimal viewing. This flask, known as a matula, is the iconic symbol of the medieval doctor, as much as the stethoscope is for a modern one. The physician doesn't just glance at it. This is a formal, almost ritualized examination. He holds the matula up to the light with the gravity of a wine connoisseur inspecting a rare vintage. He is about to read your secrets. The urine isn't just waste. It's a messenger, a liquid report distilled from every corner of your body, carrying news of the battle being waged between your humors. He begins by examining the color. An entire industry of color charts existed, some with up to 20 different shades, each with a specific meaning. Is your urine a pale, straw like color? That could indicate an excess of phlegm, a cold and moist condition. Iridescent hue, too much blood, a hot and sanguine state. Pale, almost black color was a terrible sign, often associated with an excess of black bile, melancholy, and impending death. Next, he studies the density and clarity. Is it thick and clouded? That could mean undigested food or impurities in the system. Are there bubbles? The size and persistence of the bubbles could indicate which organ was afflicted. Froth on top might point to a headache or problems in the head. Then, he swirls the liquid in the flask gently, observing any sediment or particles. These were believed to be a direct representation of the humors. He would look at the shape, color, and position of these floaters. Did they sink to the bottom, stay in the middle, float to the top? Each layer of the flask corresponded to a different region of the body: the top for the head, the middle for the torso, and the bottom for the lower organs. By seeing where the impurities gathered, he could pinpoint the location of your humoral imbalance with supposedly great precision. And now for the part that truly separates the dedicated medieval physician from the squeamish modern patient. The examination would often involve smell and, yes, sometimes even taste. A sweet smell or taste something we would now immediately recognize as a sign of diabetes was noted as honey urine. Different acrid or foul smells were meticulously catalogued, each pointing to a different kind of internal decay or humoral problem. The physician who was willing to go this extra step was considered exceptionally thorough. This practice of uroscopy became so central to medicine that it led to a very specific kind of fraud. Urine prophets or quacks would travel from town to town, claiming they could diagnose any illness, predict the future, or even determine if a woman was pregnant and the gender of her child, all from just looking at a flask of urine. They often didn't even need to see the patient. A servant could bring a sample, and the quack would put on a great show of inspecting it before delivering a dramatic and oft completely fabricated diagnosis. It got so bad that legitimate, university-trained physicians were constantly trying to distinguish themselves from these charlatans, writing books on the proper way to perform uroscopy and warning the public about frauds. So, how accurate was any of this? This is a topic that medical historians find both fascinating and frustrating. On the one hand, uroscopy was almost entirely based on the flawed theory of the four humors. The elaborate charts and diagrams showing what sediment in the middle of the flask meant for your little were pure fantasy. However, buried within all the pseudoscience were kernels of genuine clinical observation. A physician who saw very dark or bloody urine was right to be concerned. A physician who noted that the urine smelled sweet was observing a real and important symptom. They were seeing real signs of diseases like diabetes, kidney failure, or jaundice. The problem was their interpretation. They were fitting real minus world data into a completely imaginary framework. They saw the right clues but came to the wrong conclusions. They correctly identified that the urine held vital information about a person's health, a concept that is absolutely central to modern diagnostics. But their inability to understand the body's actual chemistry meant their analysis was a mixture of astute observation and wild, systemic delusion. The Martula flask itself is the perfect symbol of this paradoxically scientific minus looking tool used for a process that was, in the end, a form of divination. Your physician finally sets the flask down, his face a mask of solemn knowledge. He has seen the state of your soul in your water. He now has the full picture. Your astrological chart has told him when your body is vulnerable, and your urine has told him what is wrong inside it. He is now ready, with the full confidence of his science, to proceed with the treatment, and that treatment will almost certainly involve a shiny lancet. Your physician has consulted the stars and peered deep into your urine. He has all the data he needs, and the conclusion is almost always the same: your humors are dangerously out of balance. Specifically, you have an excess of one of them, most commonly blood. The prescription is therefore simple, direct, and universal. The excess must be removed. It's time for a bloodletting. You are now about to experience the single most common medical procedure in Western history, a practice that spanned at least 500 years and was considered the ultimate cure minus all. From a common cold to the bubonic plague, from a headache to a broken heart, there was scarcely an ailment that bloodletting was not thought to improve. It was more than a treatment. It was a fundamental principle of medicine, as central to their world as antibiotics are to ours. The physician chooses the site for the procedure with care. This isn't random. The choice of vein is guided by a combination of Galenic tradition and astrological charts. If your ailment is in your head, he might choose a vein in your forehead or temple. For liver problems, they'd likely bleed you from a vein in your right arm. For matters of the heart or spleen, the left arm. There were detailed maps of the body showing which vein corresponded to which organ, ensuring the bad blood was being drawn from the correct source. He produces his primary tool lancet. It's a small, sure, often beautifully crafted knife with a pointed blade. He might also use a phlegm, a tool with multiple blades of different sizes that could be placed over a vein and struck with a small mallet for a quick, deep cut. The tools are wiped clean, perhaps with a cloth, for the concept of sterilization is centuries away. The risk of infection is immense, but it's a risk no one yet understands. The physician ties a strip of cloth tightly around your upper arm to make the vein swell. He murmurs a prayer or checks his astrological almanac one last time to ensure the moon isn't in a dangerous position. Then, with a practiced hand, he makes the incision. The dark, venous blood wells up and begins to flow into a special calibrated bowl, often made of pewter or brass, with lines on the inside to measure the amount being drawn. The goal is to remove a specific quantity of blood, an amount the physician calculates based on your age, your constitution, the season, and the severity of your illness. It could be a few ounces for a mild condition, or a pint or more for a serious fever. The ideal outcome was for you to feel faint, a state known as swooning. This was seen as a clear sign that the body was rebalancing itself, that the excess heat and humor were leaving your system. The physician watches you closely, waiting for your lips to turn pale and your skin to grow clammy. When you begin to feel dizzy and lightheaded, he'll declare the procedure a success. Here's a bizarre and counterintuitive detail of the practice. Bloodletting was often used to treat conditions that we would now see as being caused by blood loss, such as trauma or even sometimes complications from childbirth. A soldier with a grievous wound, already weak from losing blood, might be bled further by a surgeon in an attempt to prevent fever and inflammation. The logic of the humoral system was so powerful that it could override direct, observable evidence. The theory dictated that the body must be rebalanced, even if the patient was clearly weakening before their very eyes. The question of whether bloodletting ever actually worked is a source of continuous debate among medical historians. The overwhelming consensus is that it was almost always harmful, weakening the patient and increasing the risk of infection. However, for a very small number of conditions, it might have had a temporarily positive effect. For instance, in a patient with severe hypertension, dangerously high blood pressure, removing a significant volume of blood would, in the short term, lower their blood pressure and could relieve symptoms like a throbbing headache. For a patient with hemochromatosis, a rare genetic disorder where the body absorbs too much iron, bloodletting is, even today, a legitimate treatment. But these are rare exceptions. The vast majority of the time, any perceived benefit was likely due to the placebo effect or the body's own natural healing process. A patient with a viral fever would probably have gotten better in a few days anyway, but because they were bled at the height of their fever and then began to recover, both the patient and the doctor would credit the bloodletting. It was a classic case of confirmation bias, repeated millions of times over centuries, cementing a harmful practice as a medical miracle. The physician bandages your arm, giving you strict instructions to rest and eat cooling foods. You feel weak, shaky, then drained, but you also feel a sense of relief. You have undergone the most advanced medical treatment available. You have actively purged the sickness from your body. You have been rebalanced. The dizziness you feel isn't a sign of blood loss. It's the feeling of your humors settling back into their proper, harmonious state. As you rest, you don't feel like you've been weakened. You feel like you've been purified. And this profound psychological belief in the cure was, perhaps, the most potent part of the entire ritual. You put your trust not in your body's own ability to heal, but in the sharp, shiny lancet that promised to restore a fragile, cosmic balance. The university-trained physician has performed his sophisticated, astrologically timed bloodletting and has left you to recover. But HES an expensive man to call upon. For more routine bleeding S, or if you were a commoner without the coin for a doctor, you'd turn to a different, more accessible practitioner. You'd go to your local barber surgeon. But what if you wanted an even gentler, slower, and arguably stranger form of bloodletting? For that, you do need a specialist, and you do need to get your feet wet. You are now wading into a marshy pond on the outskirts of town. The water is murky, the air thick with the buzzing of insects. You are not here for a pleasant swim. You are here to meet one of the most unsung and slimy contributors to medieval medicine, the leech collector. Your goal is to acquire a few dozen medicinal leeches, high rudomedicinal ears, which were considered a more refined way to remove blood, unlike the breathing a vein with a lancet, which was a dramatic and sometimes dangerous procedure. Leeching was a slower, more localized process. It was thought to be particularly good for drawing out bad blood from specific, hard -to reach areas. But first, someone has to gather them. This was a real profession, and a rather miserable one at that. Leech collectors, or leech finders, were typically poor women or men who would wade into swamps and ponds, the prime habitat for these creatures, and use their own bodies as bait. They would roll up their trousers or lift their skirts and simply stand in the water, waiting for the leeches to attach to their bare legs. Once a leech had latched on, they would carefully pluck it, often to place it in a special container, often a tin box with small holes. It was a low-paying, uncomfortable job, and the collectors often suffered from significant blood loss and infections from the bites. Having purchased your leeches from a collector or an apothecary, you are now ready for your treatment. The barber-surgeon, or perhaps even a member of your own family, will administer them. The leeches are placed on the part of your body that needs attention. For a headache, they might be placed on your temples. For liver pain, on your abdomen over the liver. For hemorrhoids, a very common and enthusiastic use. For leeches, they would be applied directly to the source of the problem. The leech itself is a marvel of biological engineering. When it bites, it injects a complex cocktail of chemicals into your skin. This includes an anesthetic, so you barely feel the bite, and a powerful anticoagulant called hearth. This is the magic ingredient. Hearth prevents the blood from clotting, allowing the leech to feed uninterrupted and ensuring that the wound continues to OSP blood for hours, even after the leech has detached. A single leech can consume 5 to 10 times its body weight in blood, and the post-leech bleeding can remove just as much again. Here's a wonderfully weird detail about the practice. Leeches could be surprisingly picky eaters. They wouldn't always attach right away, especially if the patient's skin was dirty or had a strong odor. Practitioners developed various tricks to entice them. They might wash the patient's skin with sugary water or milk to make it more appealing. Sometimes they would prick the patient's skin with a needle to draw a drop of blood, giving the leech a preview of the meal to come. And once the leeches were full, they would simply fall off on their own. But what do you do with a full, expensive leech? You didn't just throw it away. Leeches were a valuable medical commodity. They were often purged by placing them in a bowl of salt or by gently squeezing them, causing them to regurgitate the blood so they could be used again another day. They were, in essence, reusable medical equipment. The use of leeches was not just a medieval folk remedy. It was a core part of mainstream Galenic medicine. Its popularity surged dramatically in the early 19th century, particularly in France, in a period that became known as leechmania. A single Parisian hospital was reportedly using 5 to 6 million leeches a year. The demand was so high that leeches were farmed and imported from all over the world, and some native leech populations were harvested to the point of extinction. It was big business. The debate among historians about leeching mirrors the one about bloodletting. Was it ever beneficial? Again, in very rare and specific cases, yes. The anticoagulant properties of hearth are real and powerful. Today, modern medicine has synthesized hearth and uses it as a potent drug. And believe it or not, leeches themselves have made a comeback in a very niche area of modern surgery. They are sometimes used in microsurgery, like reattaching the severed finger or ear. The leech's ability to draw out pooled, stagnant blood and keep circulation going in tiny, fragile blood vessels is something that is still very difficult to replicate with mechanical means. It helps prevent tissue death until the body's own circulation can be properly restored. But for the vast majority of historical uses for fevers, for humors, for headaches, it was just another slower way of doing the wrong thing. It weakened patients, caused infections, and was based on a flawed understanding of the body. As you lie there, with a dozen or so slimy creatures attached to your skin, you don't feel disgusted. You feel a sense of gentle, therapeutic relief. You can feel them working, drawing the hot, corrupted blood out of you. It's a much less violent process than the lancet. It feels more natural, more in tune with the living world. Each leech is a tiny, dedicated physician, sacrificing itself to restore your precious humoral balance. It's a strange, symbiotic, and profoundly misguided moment of healing. You've been bled by a lancet and by a leech. Your humors have been rebalanced according to the best knowledge of the age. But now, a new terror is sweeping across the land. A sickness so swift and so deadly that it makes the old fears of humoral imbalance seem quaint. The great pestilence, the Black Death, has arrived. The familiar world of medicine collapses in the face of this incomprehensible catastrophe. The university minus trained physicians, with all their astrological charts and urine flasks, are powerless. Their theories of humoral imbalance can't explain why entire towns are wiped out in a matter of weeks. They prescribe bloodletting and dietary changes, but the patients die anyway, often within days. Their failure is total and terrifyingly public, shaking the very foundations of clinic medicine. In this chaos, you see a new figure emerge on the streets. You can't see their face. It's hidden behind one of the most haunting and iconic images in the history of medicine, the beak of the plague doctor. You watch as one of these figures walks slowly down the deserted street. They are covered from head to toe in protective garments. They wear a long, waxed leather coat, gloves, and a wide minus-brimmed hat that denotes them as a doctor. But it's the mask that freezes you in your tracks. It's a tight minus-fitting mask with glass eyepieces and a long, hollow, bird-minus-like beak that projects half a foot from their face. The figure looks otherworldly, like a grim reaper who has gotten lost in an aviary. This strange and terrifying costume was not designed for pure theatricality. It was a piece of personal protective equipment based on the prevailing theory of how the plague spread. The most prominent theory at the time was not contagion in the modern sense, person minus to minus person transmission, but miasma. Miasma was bad air, a poisonous vapor believed to rise from rotting organic matter, swamps, and other foul minus-smelling places. It was thought that you got sick by simply inhaling this corrupted air, which would then upset your humoral balance and cause disease. The plague doctor's uniform was, in essence, a full minus body gas mask. The waxed coat was intended to be impermeable to the miasma, and the beak, that was the air filter. The tip of the beak was stuffed with a potent mixture of aromatic herbs, spices, and vinegar minus-soaked sponges. The common ingredients included ambergris, mint, cloves, camphor, and myrrh. This collection of pungent materials was called the rear. The idea was that as the doctor breathed, the air would pass through this herbal filter, which would purify it of the deadly miasma before it reached their lungs. The strong, good smells were thought to actively fight, often neutralize the bad smells of the plague. Here's a curious detail about the plague doctor's tools besides their protective gear. They often carried a long wooden stick or cane. This had multiple, practical purposes. It allowed them to examine patients from a distance, lifting their bedclothes or pointing to areas of concern without having to make physical contact. It could also be used to take a patient's pulse. But just as importantly, it was used to push people away, to keep the desperate and dying at a safe, miasma minus-free distance. In some cases, it was even used as a tool for penance, as some patients would ask the doctor to strike them, believing the pain might atone for the sins that brought on their illness. The identity of these plague doctors is a subject of historical debate. They weren't always the top minus tier, university minus trained physicians. Many of the most established doctors fled the cities when the plague hit. The figures who stayed behind to don the beak were often second minus rate doctors, young physicians trying to make a name for themselves, or even individuals with no formal medical training at all who were simply hired by towns to care for the sick. They were paid a handsome sum, but their job was grim and their survival rate was abysmal. Their duties often had less to do with curing people, which they rarely didn't, more to do with counting the dead and witnessing wills. It's also important to note that this specific, iconic beak doctor costume is now believed by many historians to have appeared later than the first major wave of the Black Death in the mid-14th century. It was likely developed in the 17th century by a French physician named Charles Delorme, becoming more standardized during later outbreaks of the plague. During the initial, most devastating pandemic, the protective gear was likely more varied and less theatrical. However, the image of the big doctor has become so powerfully associated with the plague that it retroactively defines our vision of that entire era of disease. As you watch this strange, beaked figure move through the silent city, you are filled with a mixture of terror and this sliver of hope. They are a walking embodiment of a medical theory. They are fighting a war against an invisible enemy, the corrupted air itself. Their methods are based on a complete misunderstanding of the disease, which we now know was primarily spread by fleas on rats and through respiratory droplets. The aromatic herbs in their beak did nothing to stop the bacteria Yersinia pestis. And yet, in a world consumed by a faceless, unstoppable death, the plague doctor represented a form of order. They were a sign that someone, at least, was trying to fight back based on a rational, scientific principle, even if that principle was entirely wrong. They were a symbol of humanity's desperate attempt to understand a force that was beyond its comprehension, fighting a terrifying new kind of war with the only weapons they had: waxed leather, a wooden stick, and a beak full of potpourri. The plague has passed, leaving a scar on the soul of Europe. The old certainties of Galenic medicine have been shaken, but not yet. As society slowly rebuilds, people continue to seek cures and explanations for their ailments in the world around them. You find yourself in a lush forest, not with a physician, but with an herbalist. She isn't looking at the stars or a flask of urine. She is looking at the plants themselves, searching for clues left there by God. You are now entering the world of the doctrine of signatures. This was a belief system, popular from the Renaissance well into the 17th century, that held that God, in his infinite wisdom, had marked or signed every plant on earth with a clue to its medicinal purpose. All you had to do was learn to read these divine signatures. The shape, color, or even the growing location of a plant was a hint, a label left by the Creator to show humanity how to use it. The herbalist points to a common weed with small, liver-shaped leaves. This, she explains, is liverwort. The name says it all, because its leaves resemble the lobes of a human liver. It was believed to be a potent remedy for all liver ailments. The resemblance was not a coincidence. It was a divine sign. You walk a little further, and she shows you a patch of eyebright. It's a delicate little flower with a spot in the center that looks remarkably like a tiny human eye. Therefore, eyebright was the go-to remedy for any and all problems related to vision, from soreness to blindness. You would make a tea from it and use it as an higher house, trusting in the signature. The most famous and enduring example of this doctrine is the walnut. The herbalist cracks one open for you. The wrinkle, by lobed kernel inside, encased in its hull, round shell, looks uncannily like a miniature human brain inside a skull. This was the clearest signature of all. Therefore, walnuts were believed to be the ultimate brain food. They were prescribed to improve memory, increase intelligence, and cure headaches and other mental afflictions. It was a direct, visual prescription from nature itself. This way of thinking was incredibly appealing. It turned the natural world into a vast, open-air pharmacy, with every plant holding a potential secret. It empowered ordinary people to become their own doctors. You didn't need complex charts or years of university training. You just needed a keen eye and a bit of faith. You could literally see the cure growing in your own backyard. Here's a wonderfully specific and illustrative example of the doctrine in action: the mandrake root. This plant was surrounded by myth and superstition, largely because its forked root often resembles a small, humanoid figure. This powerful signature meant it was considered one of the most potent medicines, useful for everything from promoting fertility to acting as a powerful anesthetic. The humanoid shape also led to the bizarre belief that when pulled from the ground, the mandrake would let out a blood-curdled scream so powerful it could kill anyone who heard it. Collectors would supposedly tie a dog to the plant and then plug their own ears as the dog, trying to follow its master, would pull the root from the ground and die in the process. This story, of course, was likely invented by cunning mandrake sellers to make their products seem more rare and valuable. The doctrine of signatures was most famously championed and systemated by the bombastic Swiss physician and alchemist Paracelsus in the 16th century. He rejected the old Galenic reliance on humoral balance and pushed for a new kind of medicine based on chemistry and observation. He believed that the key to healing was not in balancing humors, but in finding the specific essence or active chemical within a plant that could counteract a specific disease. And the doctrine of signatures was the God-given map to finding these essences. However, the history of this doctrine is a point of contention among scholars. Was it a genuine, ancient folk tradition that Paracelsus simply wrote down? Or was it more of a literary and philosophical concept, an intellectual's game of finding patterns, that only later trickled down into popular practice? Some historians argue that while people have always made associations, the idea of a formal, divine doctrine was largely a creation of Renaissance thinkers who were trying to find a spiritual order in the natural world, a way to fuse science and theology. They point out that for every plant that seems to fit, there are thousands that don't. What does a blade of grass cure? What is the signature of an oak tree? The system was highly selective and based on finding patterns where none might exist. Of course, by pure coincidence, some of these signed remedies actually work, which only reinforced the belief. Willow trees, which grow in damp places, were used to treat rheumatic aches, which were associated with dampness, and willow bark, as we know, contains a precursor to aspirin, which does relieve pain and inflammation. The walnut, the signature brain food, is now known to be rich in omega-3 fatty acids, which are indeed beneficial for brain health. These occasional hits gave the entire system of an air of credibility, making it seem like a true and reliable map to God's pharmacy. As you stand in the forest with the herbalist, the world feels different. It's not a random collection of trees and weeds. It's a living text, full of symbols and secrets waiting to be deciphered. Every leaf, every flower, every root holds a potential promise. Your health is not in the hands of a distant doctor, but right here, growing at your feet. All you have to do is look closely enough to see the signature hidden in plain sight. You sought healing from the divine signatures in plants. But what if you have a problem that requires more than an herbal remedy? A broken bone, a bladder stone, a gangrenous limb that needs to be removed. For this, you need a surgeon. But the man you're going to see is not just a surgeon. In his shop, you can also get a shave, a haircut, and perhaps have a tooth pulled. Welcome to the world of the barber-surgeon. For centuries in Europe, the professions of barber and surgeon were inextricably linked. Barbers had sharp tools and steady hands, skills useful for both trimming a beard and lancing a boil, while university-trained physicians were considered intellectuals who dealt with the internal workings of the body, the humors. The stars they generally looked down upon the messy, hands-on work of cutting into a person. That manual labor was left to craftsmen, to the barbers. The iconic red and white striped pole we still see outside barbershops today is a direct relic of this dual profession. The red represents blood, the white represents bandages, and the pole itself represents the staff a patient would grip to make their veins bulge during a bloodletting. You find yourself in the barber-surgeon shop. It's a bustling, multi-purpose space. In one corner, a man is getting a knee trim. In another, someone is wincing as a tooth is extracted with a terrifying looking pair of pliers. And you are here for the main event, an amputation. Your leg has been crushed in an accident, and gangrene has set in. It's your leg or your life. There are three huge, terrifying problems with surgery in this era. The first is pain. There is no anesthesia. Nothing. The only pain relief you might be offered is a large swig of alcohol or a piece of wood to bite down on. Some surgeons employed strong men whose only job was to hold the patient down on the table. The primary quality of a good surgeon, therefore, was not precision, but speed. A leg amputation performed by a skilled surgeon like the famous Dominique Jean-Nel Harry of Napoleonic France could be completed in under a minute. The speed was a mercy, a desperate race against the agony of the patient. The second problem is bleeding. They had a basic understanding of using tourniquets to slow the bleeding during the operation, but stopping it afterward was another matter. The main technique was cauterization. After the limb was severed with a saw, the surgeon would take an iron poker, heated glowing minus hot in a brazier, and press it against the open wound and blood vessels. The searing of the flesh would seal the vessels and stop the bleeding. It was brutally effective but caused immense additional trauma and pain. The third, and most deadly, problem was infection. The concept of germs was completely unknown. Surgical tools were wiped clean, but not sterilized. The surgeon might wear an apron, but it was often a stiff, blood-encrusted garment worn with a strange sense of pride, a testament to his experience. The pus that inevitably formed in a wound in the days after a surgery was not seen as a sign of infection, but as a normal and even desirable part of the healing process. It was called laudable pus, and if a wound wasn't producing it, the surgeon would become concerned. They were, in essence, hoping for a sign that we would see as a 5- alarm fire. Here we encounter a strange and fascinating moment in surgical history, the story of Ambroise Père, a 16th-century French barber-surgeon. During a battle, then a young army surgeon ran out of the boiling oil that was traditionally used to cauterize gunshot wounds. Desperate, he improvised a dressing made of egg yolk, rose oil, and turpentine. He was convinced that the soldiers he treated this way would be dead by morning. To his astonishment, he found them resting comfortably, with little pain or inflammation, while the soldiers treated with the standard boiling oil were feverish and in agony. It was a revelation. Père went on to reintroduce the ancient practice of using ligatures, tying off individual blood vessels with thread to stop bleeding after amputations, a much gentler and more effective method than the hot iron. He famously said, "I dressed him, God healed him." This story is often hailed as a great leap forward. However, the adoption of his methods highlights a paradox that historians still grapple with. While Pére's gentler approach caused less immediate trauma in a world without germ theory, it may have actually led to higher rates of death from secondary infection. The red-hot cauterizing iron, for all its brutality, was also effectively sterilizing the wound surface. The threads of the ligatures, on the other hand, were unsterilized and could introduce bacteria deep into the wound, leading to fatal sepsis days or weeks later. It's a classic example of how a single improvement in medicine can have complex and unforeseen consequences when the underlying principles of disease are not understood. They had made a brilliant advance, but science needed to catch up to make it truly safe. You lie on the table. The barber-surgeon and his assistants tie you down. You take a deep breath, bite down hard on a leather strap, and say a prayer. The saw is a blur. The pain is a white-hot explosion that consumes the world. And then, the sickening smell of burning flesh as the iron is applied. Your ordeal is over in a matter of minutes, but it feels like a lifetime. You have survived the skill, speed, and stunning bravery of a man who fought death with a saw and a hot poker. In a world where the simplest cut could be a death sentence, you are alive, but your real battle, the fight against the invisible enemies of infection, has only just begun. You've survived the barber-surgeon saw, a testament to the brutal realities of pre-anesthetic surgery. But the world of medicine is on the cusp of a rebellion. The old ways, the slavish devotion to Galen, the endless balancing of humors are being challenged by a new generation of thinkers, and none were more challenging, more arrogant, or more influential than the man you are about to meet. His name is Theophrastus von Hohenheim, but he calls himself Paracelsus. To call him a doctor is an understatement. He was an alchemist, a philosopher, a mystic, and a medical revolutionary with a talent for making enemies. He strides into the lecture hall at the University of Basel, where he has recently been appointed city physician and professor of medicine. But he doesn't carry the traditional texts of Galen or Avicenna. Instead, he carries a bundle of his own writings and a brazier filled with burning sulfur and saltpeter. In front of the stunned faculty and students, he declares that the wisdom of the ancient physicians is worthless. He throws a copy of Avicenna's Canon of Medicine, the cornerstone of medical education for 500 years, into the flames. Your heads are full of dung. He roars at the other professors. You will follow me. I will be the monarch of medicine. It was a declaration of war. Paracelsus rejected the entire foundation of humoral theory. Sickness, he argued, was not caused by an imbalance of four fluids. It was caused by specific, external agents that attacked specific organs. A disease of the lungs was a problem in the lungs, not a problem of excess phlegm throughout the body. This idea of localized illness was a radical departure and a crucial step toward modern pathology. His solution was not to rebalance the body, but to attack the disease with its own kind of weapon. This is where his background in alchemy came in. He believed that the world was made of three prime substances, salt representing the body, sulfur the soul, and mercury the spirit. Health was the proper balance of these three. More importantly, he believed that the cure for a disease could be found in the very thing that caused it, but in a purified, distilled form. His famous motto was "the dose makes the poison." This meant that a substance that was toxic in a large dose could be a powerful medicine in a small, carefully prepared one. So, what did this mean in practice? It meant he created medicines from things that other doctors considered deadly poisons. He used arsenic, antimony, and, most famously, mercury to treat various ailments. He developed a tincture of opium, which he called laudanum, a phenomenally effective painkiller that would become one of the most widely used and abused medicines for the next 3 centuries. He was pioneering a new field, chemotherapy, or the use of chemicals to treat disease. Herein lies a truly bizarre and illustrative aspect of his alchemical medicine, his belief in alkahest, the universal solvent. Paracelsus, like many alchemists, was obsessed with the idea of finding a single substance that could dissolve any other substance, reducing it to its fundamental elements. He believed that if he could find this alkahest, he could create the ultimate medicines by purifying poisons into their healing essences. Of course, there's a simple paradox here that even thinkers at the time pointed out. If alkahest can dissolve anything, what kind of container could you possibly keep it in? This quirky, unsolvable riddle highlights the blend of brilliant insight and mystical fantasy that defined Paracelsus's work. He was reaching for a kind of chemical magic. Paracelsus's abrasive personality and radical ideas made him a medical outlaw. He was kicked out of Basel after less than a year. He spent the rest of his life wandering through Europe, a vagabond genius, getting into fights, trading patience, and writing furiously. He chose to write not in Latin, the traditional language of scholars, but in German, so that his ideas could be read by common people and barber-minus surgeons, the very people the academic physicians despised. The legacy of Paracelsus is a topic of fierce debate among historians. Was he a true scientific visionary who, single-handedly dragged medicine out of the humoral dark ages? Or was he a charlatan, a self-promoting quack whose chemical cures were just as dangerous, if not more so, than the bloodletting he railed against? The truth is, he was both. He was a transitional figure, standing with one foot in the mystical, alchemical world of the past and the other in the new, experimental world of chemistry. His rejection of Galen was a vital act of creative destruction that opened the door for new ideas. His concept of specific diseases and specific cures was a paradigm shift, but his methods were still steeped in magic and mysticism. He prescribed dangerous heavy metals based on astrological principles and alchemical theory. He was a necessary rebel, a bombastic and flawed prophet who burned down the old temple of medicine, clearing the ground for something new to be built in its place. You watch him, a whirlwind of arrogance and insight, and you realize you are witnessing a turning point. The old, elegant system of the four humors is being challenged by a messier, more dangerous, and perhaps more potent kind of medicine. The choice is no longer between a soothing herbal tea and a bloodletting. Now, you might be offered a dose of poison, a chemical bullet aimed at the heart of your disease. It's a terrifying and exhilarating new frontier. You've witnessed the chemical rebellion of Paracelsus, who believed in treating the body with purified poisons. But the world of medicine is full of strange ideas, and some are so counterintuitive they sound like a practical joke. You are now about to encounter a therapy that seems to defy all logic. A cure that doesn't target the patient at all. It targets the weapon that injured them. You have been wounded in a duel. A nasty cut on your arm from a sword. You clean the wound as best you can. But, instead of applying a poultice to your arm, a physician instructs you to do something very different. He tells you to bring him the sword that cut you. He takes the weapon, carefully cleans it, and then applies a special ointment to the cold steel of the blade. This is the weapon's salve, or ungentum armaria. He tells you to go home. Keep your actual wound clean and bandaged with a simple cloth. Undress. The healing, he explains, will happen at a distance by treating the sword. His treating your injury. This was a real and surprisingly popular medical theory in the 17th century, championed by physicians, alchemists, and even some respected scientific figures of the day. The recipe for the weapon salve was complex and gruesome. It often included ingredients like mummy dust ground minus up Egyptian mummies, human blood, fat from a hanged man, and earthworms, all mixed together with a base of lard at a specific astrological time. The resulting concoction was a potent brew of sympathetic magic. The theory behind it was based on a principle called sympathetic action, a belief that objects that were once in contact continue to influence each other from a distance. The sword, having been in contact with your blood and flesh, now shared a mystical connection with your will. The blood left on the sword contained a portion of your spirit or life minus force. By applying the healing salve to the weapon, the salve's curative powers could be transmitted back to you through his invisible, sympathetic link. Proponents of this method, like the English court physician Sir Canon Digby, offer elaborate explanations for how it worked. Digby, a founding member of the prestigious Royal Society, argued that the soul, warmed by the sun, released tiny, invisible particles of healing. These particles would then seek out the spirituous particles of your blood that were still clinging to the weapon. The two sets of particles would then travel together through the air, find their way back to your body, and enter the wound to promote gentle, rapid healing. It was a fascinating attempt to create a scientific explanation for what was essentially a magical ritual, blending the language of the new atomic theory with ancient superstition. And here's the truly bizarre part it often seemed to work. There were countless testimonials from soldiers and duelists who swore by the weapon salve. They would report that, after the salve was applied to the blade, their wounds healed remarkably quickly, with far less pain and pus than usual. This apparent success created a major medical controversy. On one side were the sympathetic doctors like Digby, who published case studies on elaborate theories. On the other side were more skeptical physicians who found the entire idea preposterous. They argued that it was just foolish superstition. The debate raged in medical journals and pamphlets. How could treating a sword possibly heal a man miles away? The answer to this paradox, and the reason for the salve's success, is a perfect illustration of how medicine can advance by accident. It wasn't about what was being put on the sword. It was about what wasn't being put on the wound. The standard treatment for a deep cut at the time involved probing the wound, stuffing it with various irritating ointments, and wrapping it in dirty bandages. This treatment almost always introduced infection, leading to the formation of laudable pus, fever, and often death. The weapon salve, by contrast, prescribed a radical and, at the time, unheard minus of approach to wound care, leaving it alone. Patients were instructed to simply keep the wound clean, covered, then dry. This, of course, is the ideal way to allow a wound to heal. By treating the sword instead of the flesh, the weapon salve doctors were, for all the wrong reasons, practicing a rudimentary form of antiseptic wound management. They were giving the body a chance to heal itself, free from the prodding and poisoning of conventional 17th-century medicine. The wound healed not because of a magical salve on a sword, but because it was finally being left in peace. This historical episode is still a subject of great interest to medical historians. It's a case study in the power of the placebo effect and the importance of a control group. The weapon salve proponents were essentially running an uncontrolled experiment. Their method worked better than the alternative, but they attributed the success to the wrong variable, the salt, not the lack of harmful intervention. It's a classic example of how even the most bizarre and magical minus seeming ideas can sometimes lead to better outcomes, albeit through a complete misunderstanding of why. It was a step forward disguised as a leap sideways into the occult. So use it at home. You're wrapped in a clean, simple bandage. Miles away, your physician is carefully tending to a sword, perhaps Ray minus applying the greasy, foul minus smelling salve as the moon enters the right phase. You feel a strange sense of connection to the weapon. The leaving its treatment is your own. You are being healed by a ghost, a theory, a magical link, and because no one is putting anything harmful into your arm, you are, against all odds, actually getting better. You've been healed by a magical salve applied to a sword, a strange detour into the world of sympathetic magic. But now, let's say your ailment isn't a simple wound. You suffer from a persistent and disfiguring skin condition, perhaps SC or uvula, a form of tuberculosis that causes swollen, oozing lymph nodes in the neck. The usual remedies have failed. There is one last, extraordinary treatment you can seek. It requires no medicine, no surgery, and no fee. It requires you to stand in a long line and wait for the touch of a king. You are now in the great hall of a royal palace in England or France. The air is thick with a mixture of nervous anticipation and the faint, sweet smell of sickness. You are surrounded by hundreds of other sufferers, people from all walks of life, all waiting for a miracle. This is the ceremony of the royal touch, one of the longest minus lasting and most popular forms of faith healing in European history. The belief was simple and powerful. The legitimate, divinely minus appointed monarch of the land possessed a god minus given hereditary power to cure certain diseases with their touch alone. This specific disease was SC or uvula, which became so strongly associated with this cure that it was commonly known as the king's evil. To be touched by the king or queen was not just an honor, it was a recognized medical treatment. The ceremony itself was a highly organized and theatrical affair. You and the other sufferers are arranged in rows. The king, often accompanied by his chaplains and physicians, moves slowly down the line. When he reaches you, a chaplain will read a short prayer. He put his hands upon them, and he healed them. The king will then gently touch your face or the swollen glands on your neck. After the touch, you are given a special coin, often a gold angel, and a ribbon to be worn around your neck. This coin, known as a touch minus piece, was considered a vital part of the cure. It was an amulet, a physical reminder of the royal contact, and it was believed that its power would continue the healing process. Losing the touch minus piece was thought to cause the disease to return. People clung to these coins as if their lives depended on it, and in their minds, they did. This practice began in the Middle Ages, with both the English and French monarchies claiming the miraculous power. It wasn't a fringe folk belief, it was a state minus sponsor, church minus sanctioned medical ritual. Kings like Louis XIV of France and Charles II of England touched tens of thousands of people during their reigns. The ceremony served a dual purpose. For the sick, it was a source of profound hope, but for the monarchy, it was an incredibly effective piece of political propaganda. In an age of contested successions and political instability, what better way to prove you were the one true God minus chosen ruler than to demonstrate your supernatural healing powers in front of thousands of your subjects? Each cured person became a walking, talking advertisement for the legitimacy of the crown. Here's a wonderfully strange political detail. The practice became a political football during times of dynastic struggle. When the Stuart dynasty was exiled from England, its supporters claimed that the new monarchs, like William and Mary, had lost the healing touch because they were not the legitimate rulers. Meanwhile, the Stuart kings, living in exile in France, continued to perform the ceremony for their loyal followers, trying to keep their claim to the divine right alive. Your choice of who to get touched by was a declaration of your political allegiance. But did it actually work? This is a fascinating question for historians and medical anthropologists. From a modern medical perspective, of course, The king's touch has no physiological effect on the tuberculosis bacterium. However, Sciaria bulla is a disease that can have periods of natural remission, where the symptoms seem to disappear on their own for a time. If this remission happened to coincide with the royal touch, it would be hailed as a miracle, reinforcing the belief for everyone who witnessed it. Furthermore, the power of the placebo effect in such a charged, theatrical, and deeply hopeful environment cannot be overstated. You have traveled for days, waited for hours, and are now in the presence of the most powerful person in the kingdom, God's chosen representative on earth. The ceremony is designed to overwhelm the senses and instill a profound belief in the possibility of a cure for conditions that have a psychosomatic component, or simply for the perceived well-being of the patient. This powerful psychological boost could have had a tangible, if temporary, effect on their sense of health. The debate among historians is not if it were, but why people believed it worked so fervently and for so long. Some historians focus on the political angle, seeing it primarily as a tool of statecraft. Others focus on the religious aspect, framing it within a broader culture of miracles and saintly relics. Still others look at it from a medical history perspective, highlighting it as a prime example of the placebo effect in the natural history of disease. It was a phenomenon that existed at the crossroads of politics, religion, and medicine. You feel the king's hand on your neck. It's a brief, dry touch. He moves on. An official places the cool, heavy gold coin on a ribbon around your neck. You clutch it, a wave of relief and hope washing over you. You don't know if you are truly cured, but you have been seen. You have been touched by divinity. In a world that offered few cures for your condition, this brief moment of contact with sacred power was the most potent medicine you could ever hope to receive. You sought a cure from the hand of a king, a ritual steeped in ancient faith and political power. The knell, the spirit of the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, is beginning to take hold. There's a new, burning curiosity not about the magical connections between things, but about the very machine of the human body itself. How does it actually work? To answer that question, you'll need to buy a ticket. You are no longer a patient, but a spectator. You find yourself in a specially built room, an anatomy theater. It's a steep, circular or oval shaped hall with tiered wooden benches, like a miniature Colosseum. In the center, under a bright skylight or the glow of candelabras, is a marble slab, and on that slab lies a human body, usually the corpse of an executed criminal. The air is cold to preserve the body, but it's thick with the smell of mortality and the buzz of excited chatter. This is a public dissection, a major social and intellectual event. You are surrounded by a mixed crowd, serious medical students with their notebooks open, university professors in their academic robes, curious artists like Leonardo da Vinci or Rembrandt, eager to understand the secrets of human form, and even wealthy townsfolk who have come for the sheer spectacle of it all. At the center of the theater stands the professor of anatomy. He is the master of ceremonies. In earlier times, the professor would sit in a high chair, reading aloud from the infallible texts of Galen, while a lowly barber minus surgeon did the actual cutting down below, pointing out the parts as they were named. But now, in the spirit of the new age, the professor himself has come down from his chair. He holds the knife. He is going to demonstrate and discover, not just recite. The most famous of these new, hands-on anatomists was Andreas Vesalius, a 16th-century Flemish physician who revolutionized the study of anatomy. As a young man, he was so obsessed with understanding the human body that he was known to steal the bodies of criminals from the gallows. His great work, De Humanic, Opus Fabricae on the fabric of the human body, was a monumental book filled with exquisitely detailed and accurate anatomical drawings. It was the first time anyone had systematically challenged the authority of Galen based on direct human observation. You watch as the Vesalius-like figure at the center of the theater begins his work. He makes the first incision. The crowd leans in, a collective gasp and murmur rippling through the room. This is a rare and forbidden sight. For centuries, the internal workings of the human body were a complete mystery. shrouded in religious abhorrent the inherited mistakes of ancient Greek physicians who had only dissected animals. Now, the truth is being laid bare. The anatomist raises his voice, explaining each step. He shows the students the layers of abdominal muscle. He lifts the great, dark mass of the liver. Galen told us this organ has 5 lobes, he might announce, his voice echoing in the theatre. And look, you can all see for yourselves. The human liver has but 4. This is not just a lesson, it's a refutation. Every cut of the knife is a potential blow against 1,000 years of dogma. He shows them that the human jawbone is a single bone, not 2, and that the wonderful net of blood vessels at the base of the brain simply isn't there. Here's a peculiar untheatrical detail of these events. Because there was no refrigeration, the dissection had to follow a strict order. The anatomist would always start with the abdomen, as the organs there, like the intestines, would put reified the festus. Next, he would move to the chest, to examine the heart and lungs. Finally, he would dissect the head and the limbs. The entire process could take several days, and by the end, the smell in the theatre would be overwhelming. To combat the stench, large bouquets of flowers and fragrant herbs were often placed around the room, a sweet smelling but ultimately futile defense against the powerful odor of decay. Often, a dissection would be accompanied by live music, with flute or viol players providing a strangely beautiful soundtrack to the gruesome proceedings. It was science, theater, and a memento mori all rolled into one. The impact of these public dissections is still a hot topic for historians of science and art. On one hand, they were a monumental leap forward for medicine. They corrected centuries of anatomical errors and placed the field on a firm footing of empirical observation. Modern medicine is unthinkable without the knowledge gained on these tables. It allowed for the development of effective surgery and a true understanding of physiology. On the other hand, there's a debate about the nature of the gaze in the anatomy theatre. Was it a purely objective, scientific gaze, or was it also a voyeuristic one? These events were, without a doubt, a form of public entertainment. The body on the slab was an object of intense curiosity, but the person it had once been was often forgotten, reduced to a set of biological puzzles to be solved. The anatomists themselves sometimes performed with a flair for the dramatic, playing to the crowd and enhancing the spectacle. It was a place where the noble quest for knowledge met its archer, more morbid human curiosity. As the demonstration ends for the day, you file out of the theater, blinking in the daylight. The images are seared into your mind. You have seen the hidden architecture of your own body. You have witnessed the thrilling, messy, and slightly unsettling birth of a new kind of science, one that was no longer content to read the old maps, but was determined to draw a new one, based on the undeniable, visceral truth of the human machine itself. You have witnessed the body being mapped in the anatomy theater, a scientific quest to understand its mechanics, but the search for cures often leads down stranger, more ghoulish paths. The belief that one person's body could be used to heal another's wasn't limited to the king's touch or the surgeon's table. It could get much, much weirder. You are now in an apothecary shop, a place filled with jars of dried herbs and mysterious minerals. But you're here for a very specific and very expensive ingredient, mummy. That's right. For centuries, one of the most sought after and widely used medicines in Europe was mumia, a substance made from the preserved remains of ancient Egyptians. You could buy it as a black, resinous chunk, or, more commonly, as a fine brown powder. It was prescribed for an astonishing range of ailments. It was a panacea, a cure minus all. Suffer from a headache? Take a pinch of mummy powder. Mummy powder. Have you been bruised or wounded? Apply a mummy based plaster. Have you been poisoned? Mummy was considered the ultimate antidote. The trade in mummies became a booming, if macabre, industry. Tombs in Egypt were plundered, not for gold or jewels, but for the bodies themselves. The preserved corpses of pharaohs, priests, and commoners alike were broken up, packed into crates, and shipped to the great commercial hubs of Europe. Like Venice and Amsterdam, to be sold to apothecaries, it was a standard, mainstream medicine, prescribed by the most respected physicians and consumed by kings and popes. King Francis I of France was said to never travel anywhere without a small pouch of mummy powder, just in case. But how did this bizarre practice start? The origin lies in a linguistic misunderstanding. The original mumia was not a body, but a natural asphalt or bitumen found seeping from the ground in Persia. This black, gummy substance was a traditional folk remedy in the Middle East. The word for bitumen in Persian was, when Arab invaders conquered Egypt, they saw the blackened, resin-minus coated bodies being pulled from the tombs. They mistook the dark resin used in the embalming process for the medicinal Persian bitumen and called the bodies mumia as well. At first, doctors believed that the only true medicinal mummy was one that was still filled with this natural bitumen. But as demand grew and true bitumen-minus laced mummies became scarce, the definition conveniently expanded. Soon, any preserved Egyptian body would do. The medical theory was that the embalming spices and the sheer age of the mummies gave them powerful preservative qualities that could be transferred to the patient, strengthening their body and prolonging their life. Here's a particularly grim detail of the mummy trade as the supply of genuine ancient mummies began to dwindle in the 16th and 17th centuries. An entire counterfeit industry sprang up. Unscrupulous merchants would take the bodies of recently executed criminals, beggars, or hospital patients, prepare them by drying them in the sun or smoking them, coat them in bitumen, and pass them off as authentic ancient remains. One famous 16th-century physician, Guy de la Fontaine, visited an Alexandrian mummy-minus monger and was cheerfully shown the fresh mummies being made from the bodies of the recently deceased. The trade was so lucrative that people were literally creating fake ancient corpses to meet the demand for this ghoulish medicine. The use of mummy powder is a fascinating case study for medical historians, as it sits at the intersection of trade, superstition, and the beginnings of chemical medicine. Was it pure magic and cannibalism, or was there a rational thought process behind it? The debate is ongoing. Some historians argue it was a form of corpse medicine, a broader belief that parts of a healthy or powerful body could be consumed to gain its strength. This tradition also included using human skull moss, fat, or blood as remedies. Others argue that physicians were trying to be scientific. They were interested in the chemical properties of the resins and spices used in mummification, like myrrh and cedar oil, which were known to have preservative qualities. They weren't just eating the body. They were consuming a complex, ancient chemical preparation. Paracelsus, the great chemical reformer, was a big believer in mummy, seeing it as a source of potent, life-minus giving essences. It was a bizarre bridge between the old world of magical thinking and the new world of chemical pharmacology. As you stand in the apothecary shop, you look at the jar of brown powder. It's expensive, exotic, and recommended by the finest doctors. It contains the dust of a person who lived and died thousands of years ago in a distant land. The idea of consuming it is unsettling, a form of ritual cannibalism dressed up as medicine. And yet, the promise it holds is immense, the promise of a cure, of preservation, of life wrested from the jaws of death itself. You buy a small packet, hoping that the ancient dust of the pharaohs holds the secret to soothing your modern ailment. You are about to take a dose of history, in the most literal sense possible. You've swallowed the dust of ancient pharaohs in a desperate search for a cure. The body has been a source of ghoulish remedies and a spectacle in the anatomy theater. But now, in the more enlightened era of the late 18th and 19th centuries, the focus shifts from the body's interior to its exterior, specifically to the shape of your head. You're about to have your personality, your talents, and your moral character diagnosed not by your humors or your stars, but by the bumps on your skull. Welcome to the office of a phrenologist. The room looks scientific, lined with bookshelves and plaster casts of human heads. There are dozens of them, each one meticulously marked with a grid and a series of numbers. The phrenologist, a man of great seriousness and scientific certainty, invites you to sit down. He is not going to ask about your symptoms. He is going to read your head like a man. Phrenology was a system developed by the German physician Franz Joseph Gall around the turn of the 19th century. Gall had a simple but revolutionary idea. He proposed that the brain was not a single, uniform organ, but a collection of many different organs, each one responsible for a specific mental faculty or personality trait. He identified 27 of these faculties, including things like amativeness, the propensity for romantic love, acquisitiveness, the desire to hoard, benevolence, wit, and even a murder organ. Here was the crucial second step in his theory. Gall believed that the size of each of these cerebral organs was a direct measure of its power. A person with a large benevolence organ would be naturally kind, while someone with a large acquisitiveness organ would be greedy. And this is the key to phrenology. He claimed that the skull hardened over the brain during childhood, perfectly preserving its shape. Therefore, by carefully examining the bumps and contours of a person's skull, a trained phrenologue he could determine the size of the underlying brain organs, and thus create a complete and accurate profile of their character and abilities. The phrenologue he takes out a special pair of calipers and a soft measuring tape. He begins to meticulously measure your head, his fingers probing for bumps and indentations. He makes notes on a detailed chart, a map of the skull, which shows the precise location of each faculty. He might murmur, his fingers exploring the area just above your ear. A well-developed organ of destructiveness. You have a temper, but also a great capacity for drive and overcoming obstacles. He moves to the top of your head, and you, a prominent veneration. You have a natural respect for tradition and authority. It was a wonderfully tidy and appealing system. It promised to make the invisible landscape of the mind visible and measurable. It was presented not as a parlor game, but as a true science of the mind, a way to objectively understand human nature. Phrenology became wildly popular, especially in America and Britain. Traveling phrenologists set up booths at country fairs. Businessmen consulted phrenologists before hiring employees. Parents had their children's heads read to determine their future career paths. Should little Johnny be a poet or a politician? A look at his ideality and self-esteem bumps would provide the answer. Here's a bizarre and slightly dark application of the science. Phrenology was enthusiastically adopted in the criminal justice system. Criminologists would create plaster casts of the heads of famous criminals, reading their skulls to find the supposed physical proof of their depravity. An enlarged secretiveness organ combined with a deficient benevolence organ was seen as the signature of a born criminal. It offered a simple, physical explanation for complex social problems, suggesting that some people were just biologically destined to be bad. But was any of it true? Today, phrenology is considered a classic pseudoscience, completely discredited. The debate among historians is not whether it was right or worst, but why it was so incredibly popular and what its legacy is. Gall's first premise, that different functions are localized to different areas of the brain, was actually a brilliant and foundational insight that modern neuroscience has confirmed, though his map was entirely wrong. It was a radical break from the idea of the brain as an undifferentiated mass. His second and third premises, however, were completely false. The size of a brain region doesn't necessarily correlate with its power. And more importantly, the skull does not conform to the shape of the brain's surface. The bumps on your head have no relation to the personality organs underneath. Gall and his followers were guilty of extreme confirmation bias. They would look for evidence that supported their theories and ignore anything that contradicted them. They would find a talkative person, feel a bump on their head in the language area, and declare it a success, ignoring all the quiet people with the same bump. The legacy of phrenology is complex. On one hand, it was a dead end that in some cases promoted harmful stereotypes. On the other hand, it popularized the idea that the mind could be studied scientifically, and that the brain was the seat of personality. It spurred on legitimate research into brain localization and function. It was a crucial, if deeply flawed, stepping stone on the path to modern psychology and neuroscience. The phrenologue finishes his examination. He hands you a detailed, handwritten report, a complete inventory of your moral and intellectual character, all gleaned from the landscape of your skull. You read that you are naturally cautious, have a good sense of humor, and a slight tendency towards stubbornness. It feels surprisingly accurate, a common effect of vague, generalized statements. You leave the office with a new understanding of yourself, not as a soul full of humors, but as a brain full of organs, all neatly packaged under your skull. You have been measured, mapped, and understood by the strange, bumpy science of the mind. You've had your head read by a PhD, a science that promised to map your very soul. But as the 19th century progresses, medicine is becoming more recognizably modern. Doctors are starting to understand disease on a microscopic level. Yet, this new knowledge sometimes faces a shocking amount of resistance from the medical establishment itself. You are now about to witness one of the most important and, at the time, most ridiculed discoveries in the history of medicine. You are in a bustling maternity ward in the Vienna General Hospital in the mid-1840s. It's a place of both birth and death. The hospital has two separate maternity clinics. One is staffed by female midwives, the other by male medical students and their professors. And there is a terrifying, inexplicable difference between the two. The mortality rate from a horrifying illness known as childbed fever, or puerperal fever, is astronomically higher in the doctor's clinic. Women who deliver in the midwife's clinic have a roughly 4% chance of dying. Women who deliver in the doctor's clinic, just down the hall, have a mortality rate that can't soar 18% or even higher. This horrifying discrepancy is a well-known fact. Pregnant women beg on their knees not to be sent to the doctor's clinic. They see it as a death sentence. The medical establishment is baffled. They attribute the difference to all sorts of things. Perhaps it's the rougher examinations by the male students. Perhaps it's miasma, a deadly fog that has somehow settled in one ward but not the other. Perhaps it's a psychological issue the women are simply more frightened of the doctors. A young Hungarian physician named Ignaz Semmelweis is obsessed with this mystery. He meticulously investigates every possible difference between the two clinics. He compares birthing positions, laundry practices, and even religious rites. Nothing explains the massive gap in death rates. Then, a tragic clue presents itself. One of Semmelweis's colleagues, a pathologist, accidentally pricks his finger with a scalpel while performing an autopsy on a woman who had died of childbed fever. The colleague quickly falls ill with similar symptoms and dies. Semmelweis has a sudden, horrifying revelation. The medical students and their professors were coming directly from the autopsy room, where they had been dissecting diseased corpses, to the maternity ward to examine pregnant women. The midwives, on the other hand, had no contact with the autopsy room. Semmelweis hypothesizes that the doctors were carrying cadaverous particles on their unwashed hands, transferring some deadly substance from the dead bodies to the healthy mothers during pelvic examinations. The solution he proposed was radical, and to our ears, shockingly simple. Doctors must wash their hands. He instituted a strict policy in his clinic. Every doctor and student had to wash their hands in a solution of chlorinated lime substance. He chose because it was effective at removing the putrid smell of the autopsy room before examining any patient. The results were immediate and astounding. The mortality rate in his clinic plummeted from over 18% to around 1%, a rate even lower than the midwife's clinic. He had found the cure. He had saved countless lives, and the medical establishment attacked him for it with a vengeance. Herein lies the truly bizarre and infuriating part of the story. Semmelweis's colleagues and superiors were outraged by his theory. Why? First, it was a profound insult to their professional dignity. The idea that they, respected gentlemen and physicians, were the carriers of death, that their own hands were unclean, was unthinkable. It flew in the face of their self-minus image as healers. Second, Semmelweis's theory lacked a scientific explanation that fit the knowledge of the day. The germ theory of disease, which would later be proven by Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch, did not yet exist. Semmelweis couldn't explain what the cadicles were or how they were. He only had the raw, undeniable statistical data. His critics dismissed his work as purely anecdotal, a coincidence. They clung to their old theories of miasmas and humors because those were established scientific framework. The debate that historians have is not about whether Semmelweis was right, but why the resistance was so fierce and total. Was it pure professional arrogance? Was it a genuine inability to accept a theory that didn't have a known mechanism? Or was it also a matter of personality? Semmelweis himself was apparently not a gifted diplomat. He was known to be abrasive, impatient, and openly contemptuous of his critics, calling them medical narrows, dumb ignoramuses. His inability to gently persuade, combined with the radical nature of his claims, created a perfect storm of rejection. Frustrated and ostracized, Semmelweis eventually left Vienna. He published his findings in a book, but it was dense, poorly organized, and filled with angry tirades against his detractors. It was largely ignored. The man who had solved the puzzle of childbed fever saw his life's work dismissed. The stress and bitterness took a toll on his mental health. In a tragic, ironic twist, Ignaz Semmelweis was committed to an insane asylum in 1865. Just a few weeks later, he died at the age of 47 from sepsis, a blood infection likely caused by a wound on his hand that became infected, the very kind of infection he had taught the world how to prevent. You stand as a silent witness in that Vienna hospital, watching a man present irrefutable proof that saves lives, only to be scorned and ridiculed. It's a chilling reminder that scientific progress is not a smooth, linear march forward. It's often a brutal fight against entrenched dogma, professional pride, and the simple, human resistance to a new idea that challenges the way the world is supposed to work. You've seen a hero of medicine become a martyr, destroyed by the very establishment he was trying to save. You've witnessed the tragic rejection of hand-washing, a life minus, saving idea scorned for its simplicity. But as the 19th century bleeds into the early 20th, a new and different kind of medical marketplace emerges. Science is advancing rapidly, but so is marketing. This is the golden age of the patent medicine, the snake oil cure minus all. You find yourself standing before a medicine show wagon that has rolled into your small town. A fast-minus talking professor with a booming voice and a magnificent mustache is captivating a crowd with tales of a miraculous elixir he has for sale. It's called Dr. Bartholomew's celebrated nerve tonic and blood purifier. He claims it can cure anything and everything: nervousness, indigestion, rheumatism, liver complaints, female troubles, and a general lack of vigor. The bottle itself is a work of art. It's made of dark glass, with a beautifully printed label full of elaborate claims and heartfelt testimonials from satisfied customers. The professor holds it up to the light. It's made from a secret formula, he confides to the crowd, handed down from ancient Native American healers and perfected with the latest discoveries of modern German science. This combination of the exotic and the scientific was a classic marketing tactic. You decide to buy a bottle. Later that evening, you take your first dose. It tastes bitter and strange, but almost immediately, you feel a warm, pleasant glow spread through your body. Your aches and pains seem to melt away. Your anxieties quiet down. This stuff really works. You feel fantastic. Of course it does, because the secret formula in Drive, Bartholomew's tonic, and countless others like it, was often a potent cocktail of ingredients that had nothing to do with ancient healers and everything to do with making you feel good. First, the primary active ingredients in many of these patent medicines were alcohol and opium. Some popular tonics were over 40% alcohol, making them stronger than whiskey. Laudanum, the tincture of opium developed by Paracelsus, was a key ingredient in soothing syrups for fussy babies and remedies for coughs and diarrhea. And as the century turned, a new wonder drug was added to the mix: cocaine. It was isolated from the coca leaf in the 1852 and was initially hailed as a miracle cure. It was used in everything from throat lozenges to hay fever remedies. You could buy coca minus infused wine, like the famous Vin Marioni, endorsed by popes and presidents, which promised to restore health, strength, and vitality. For a time, You could even find it in a popular new soda fountain drink from Atlanta. This is the wonderfully bizarre and dangerous world of the patent medicine era. There was virtually no regulation. A manufacturer could bottle up almost anything, make any claim they wanted on the label, and sell it to the public. These medicines weren't just ineffective. They were often addictive and dangerous. The soothing syrups led to countless cases of infant mortality and opiate addiction. The nerve tonics created a generation of secret alcoholics, particularly among women of the temperance movement who would never touch a drop of liquor, but would happily take their daily dose of medicine. One of the most infamous examples of this era was Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup, marketed for teething infants. Its label recommended a dose of 1 teaspoon for an older child. Its primary ingredients were alcohol and a massive amount of morphine. It was so effective at quieting fussy babies that it was nicknamed the baby killer. So why did people believe in these remedies so fervently? The debate among historians touches on several factors. First, they actually worked in the short term. Alcohol, opium, and cocaine are very effective at masking symptoms and making you feel better temporarily. In an age when most legitimate medical treatments were either useless or painful, a cure that was pleasant to take and made you feel good was a welcome relief. Second, the power of advertising was immense. The patent medicine industry was one of the first to master the art of mass marketing. They used memorable slogans, compelling testimonials, many of them completely fabricated, and vivid imagery to create a powerful brand identity. They were selling hope in a bottle. This leads to a fascinating historical argument. Were the makers of these medicines cynical charlatans who knew they were peddling poison? Or did some of them actually believe in their own products? While many were undoubtedly frauds, some may have been true believers. The line between medicine and placebo was still blurry. And if a manufacturer saw that their product made people feel better and that customers kept coming back, they may have convinced themselves of its genuine therapeutic value, ignoring the addictive properties of the core ingredients. The era of unregulated patent medicine came to a crushing halt in the United States with the passage of the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906. This landmark law didn't outlaw the products, but it required them to list their active ingredients on the label. Suddenly, when people saw that their favorite nerve tonic was 45% alcohol and their baby's soothing syrup was full of morphine, the magic began to fade. You look at the bottle of Drive, Bartholomew's tonic on your shelf. The warm glow it provides is tempting, but now you know the secret behind its magic. It's not an ancient formula. It's a potent dose of narcotics and booze. The cure it offers is not for your illness, but for your awareness of it, and the relief it provides comes at a very, very high price. You've seen the dangers of addiction hiding in a medicine bottle. The turn of the 20th century was a time of incredible scientific discovery, a period of genuine wonder and boundless optimism. But this same spirit of discovery could lead medicine down some truly glowing, and ultimately terrifying, rabbit holes. You are now entering the atomic age, not with a bang, but with a health fad. Welcome to the era of radioactive wellness. Shortly after Marie and Pierre Curie discovered radium in 1898, the world became obsessed with this mysterious new element. It glowed in the dark, it produced energy from seemingly nowhere, and it was hailed by the press as a liquid sunshine, a source of life itself. In the early days, before its deadly dangers were understood, radium was seen as a miracle substance, and if it was a miracle, it must be good for you. You find yourself in a pharmacy, but you're not looking for a tonic. You're browsing a new section filled with products that promise to energize and rejuvenate you using the power of the atom. You can buy radio or brand toothpaste that promised to give you a radiant smile. There were radium-minus infused cosmetics that claimed to smooth wrinkles and restore a youthful glow. You could even buy radioactive chocolate bars in Germany, or a Japanese brand of condoms called Atomic. But the most popular and mainstream application of this new fad was in water. The belief was that radium-minus infused water could stimulate cell activity, energize the nervous system, and cure a vast array of ailments, from arthritis and gout to high blood pressure and impotence. It was the ultimate health drink. You decide to purchase one of the most popular devices on the market, the Revigator. It's a handsome, ceramic water crawl, lined on the inside with carnotity, and all containing radium. The instructions are simple. You fill the jug with water every night, and in the morning, the water will be radiumized, charged with the life minus giving energy of radon gas, a decay product of radium. You are supposed to drink 6 to 8 glasses of this liquid sunshine every day for perfect health. Thousands of these devices were sold and used in American homes. This wasn't just a fringe quackery. It had a veneer of scientific and medical legitimacy. Spas and health resorts that were built around natural hot springs, which often contained low levels of radon gas, had been popular for centuries. Scientists now believe they had discovered the active ingredient in these healing waters. Doctors prescribed radium water, and clinics were established where patients could receive radium injections or simply sit in a room and inhale radon gas. Here's a truly bizarre detail that highlights the blind enthusiasm for this new cure. Some devices, like the radium minoscope, were sold so that consumers could watch the scintillations or flashes of light from the radium in a darkened room, proving that the energy was real. Another product was a small, pocket-sized device you could dip into your glass of water at a restaurant to give it an instant radioactive boost. It was a wellness trend you could take with you anywhere. The poster child for this dangerous fad, and the man whose story would ultimately help to end it, was a wealthy industrialist and amateur golfer named Eben Byers. In 1927, after injuring his arm, his doctor prescribed Rodithor, a popular patent medicine that was essentially just distilled water containing high concentrations of 2 radium isotopes. Byers became a true believer. He claimed it made him feel completely invigorated. He drank several bottles of it a day for years and enthusiastically recommended it to all his friends, even sending them cases of it as gifts. The tragic end to this story is a point of grim fascination for medical historians. Radium, being chemically similar to calcium, is absorbed by the body and deposited in the bones. Over time, the relentless internal radiation bombards the bone tissue, causing bone cancer, anemia, and horrific physical decay. By 1930, Eben Byers' health had completely collapsed. His teeth were falling out, and his jawbone was literally disintegrating, a condition that became known as radium jaw. He died a gruesome death in 1932, when the Wall Street Journal ran a story on his death with the headline "The Radium Water worked fine until his jaw came off." The shocking reality of radioactive cures finally hit the public consciousness. The debate among historians is how such a dangerous trend could have become so mainstream. Part of the answer lies in the newness of the science. The full, long-term effects of radiation were simply not known yet. Early researchers, including Marie Curie herself, suffered from radiation sickness, but the connection was not immediately made. Another part of the answer is the powerful narrative of hidden energy. The idea that you could tap into a secret, vital force of nature was an incredibly compelling story, one that echoed older beliefs in animal magnetism or vitalism. It was old magic dressed up in a new, scientific-sounding lab coat. You look at your expensive Revigator jug sitting on the kitchen counter. It looks so solid, so scientific, so promising. It glows faintly in the dark, a quiet promise of health and vitality. But its glow is not the glow of life. It's the glow of decay. It's a slow, silent poison you have been willingly drinking every day. The miracle cure of the atomic age has turned out to be one of its most insidious and terrifying medical mistakes. You pour the rest of the water down the drain, hoping it's not too late. You've poured the radioactive water down the drain, a close escape from a glowing undeadly fad. As we move into the mid-20th century, medicine has become far more sophisticated and powerful. But the search for a simple cure for the complexities of the human mind can still lead to shockingly brutal solutions, even ones celebrated by the highest echelons of the medical establishment. You are now about to witness a procedure that was hailed as a miracle and awarded the Nobel Prize, before being condemned as an act of barbarism, the lobotomy. You are in a state psychiatric hospital in the 1942. The wards are overcrowded. underfunded, and often chaotic. The staff struggled to manage patients with severe mental illnesses like schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and chronic depression. Treatments are limited. Patients might be subjected to insulin coma therapy or electrovoc therapy ECT, which could be effective for some but were also frightening and carried their own risks. There is a desperate need for a new solution, a way to calm the most agitated and hopeless patients. Into this desperate environment comes a new, seemingly revolutionary surgical procedure. It was developed in the 1932 by a Portuguese neurologist named Contagious. His theory was based on the idea that many mental illnesses were caused by fixed or obsessive thought patterns that were stuck in abnormal circuits in the frontal lobes of the brain. His proposed solution was to surgically sever the connections between the frontal lobes and the rest of the brain, thereby breaking these pathological circuits and liberating the patient from their torment. Mona's original procedure, called the leucotomy, involved drilling holes into the side of the patient's skull and injecting alcohol into the frontal lobes to destroy the nerve fibers. He reported dramatic success, claiming that patients who were once anxious and agitated became calm and manageable. For this pioneering work, E.G.S. Moniz was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 1949, a fact that remains a source of profound controversy and embarrassment for the Nobel Committee to this day. But it was an American neurologist and psychiatrist named Walter Freeman who would become the great popularizer and, ultimately, the monster of the lobotomy story. Freeman believed Moniz's procedure was too slow and cumbersome. He wanted a method that was fast, required no operating room, and could be performed on a mass scale. He developed a new technique called the transorbital lobotomy, a procedure so brutal and simplistic, it's hard to believe it was ever considered mainstream medicine. You watch, horrified, as Freeman demonstrates his technique. The patient is rendered unconscious, often with a jolt of ECT. Freeman then takes what is essentially a long, sharp ice pick. He actually had one custom minus made based on an ice pick from his own kitchen. He lifts the patient's eyelid, places the point of the pick into the corner of the eye socket, and, with a small mallet, hammers it through the thin layer of bone into the frontal lobes of the brain. He then sweeps the ice pick back and forth, severing the nerve connections by feel alone. He would often do this to both sides of the brain. The entire procedure could be over in less than 10 minutes. Walter Freeman became a showman, a traveling evangelist for his ice pick lobotomy. He drove around the country in a van he called his Lobotomobile, performing thousands of these procedures in state hospitals, often in front of an audience of doctors and nurses. He was known to be dangerously casual, sometimes lobotomizing two patients at once, one with each hand. The immediate results were often what the desperate hospital staff were looking for. Patients who had been violent or catatonic became docile, quiet, and passive. They were easier to manage, but the cost was catastrophic. The lobotomy didn't just sever the connections of mental illness, it severed the connections of personality. Patients were often left emotionally blunted, apathetic, and childlike. They lost their spark, their ambition, their ability to plan or feel deep emotion. The writer and critic Malcolm Cowley described the post-minus lobotomy state as an imitation of death. One of Freeman's most famous failures was Rosemary Kennedy, the sister of President John F. Kennedy, who was left permanently incapacitated and with the mental capacity of a toddler after a lobotomy performed on her in her early 20s. The legacy of the lobotomy is one of the darkest chapters in the history of psychiatry, and is a subject of intense historical debate. How could such a crude, destructive procedure have been so widely accepted? Part of the answer lies in the desperation of the time. Overcrowded asylums had no effective treatments, and the lobotomy, for all its horrors, was seen by some as a more humane alternative to a lifetime of institutionalization or constant restraints. Another part of the answer lies in the immense authority of figures like Freeman and the power of the surgical cure narrative. It offered a simple, physical solution to a complex mental problem, and the Nobel Prize for Moniz gave the entire field an unassailable veneer of scientific legitimacy. The dissenters, and there were many, were often drowned out by the chorus of praise for this new miracle. The era of the lobotomy finally came to an end in the mid-1950 seconds with the development of the first effective anti-pescatifid medications, like thorazine. These drugs could achieve similar results, calming agitated patients without the permanent, irreversible destruction of the brain. The ice pick was finally put away. You are left with the haunting image of Walter Freeman and his lobotomobile, a grim reminder of medicine's capacity for well intentioned brutality. It's a story of how the noble quest to ease suffering can, without sufficient humility and caution, led to the creation of cures that are far worse than the disease itself. You have traveled through a bizarre and often terrifying landscape of medical history. You've been bled by leeches, diagnosed by the stars, and prescribed the dust of ancient kings. You've seen science take brilliant leaps forward and horrifying steps backward. Now, here you are, at the end of this long and strange journey, lying safely in your own bed in the 21st century. Take a moment to think about the world you live in now. If you get a headache, you can take a pill containing a specific chemical compound, rigorously tested for safety and efficacy, designed to block pain receptors. You don't need to worry about balancing your humors or whether Mars is in retrograde. If you get an infection, you can take an antibiotic, a magic bullet that targets and destroys the invading bacteria without harming your own cells. You don't have to rely on a poultice of crocodile dung or a prayer to street. Sebastian, if you need surgery, it will be performed in a sterile environment by a specialist who has studied detailed anatomical maps, and you will be mercifully unconscious for the entire procedure. It's easy to look back at the practices we've explored tonight and laugh, or shudder. It's easy to dismiss the doctors and healers of the past as ignorant, superstitious, or cruel, and while some were undoubtedly charlatans, most were not. They were intelligent, dedicated people doing the very best they could with the knowledge and the tools they had. The physician carefully measuring your urine in a Matulov flask and the pH renal log, IST carefully measuring the bumps on your head were both, in their own way, trying to be scientific. They were trying to find order in the chaos of human suffering, to create a rational system to explain the inexplicable. The theories they used, the four humors, the miasma, the doctrine of signatures seem absurd to us now, but they were powerful and enduring for a reason. They provided a sense of understanding and control in a world where life was often short and brutal. Believing your fever was a predictable imbalance of humors was far more comforting than believing it was a random, meaningless event. These flawed systems gave both the patient and the healer a map, a story, and a plan of action. And in medicine, sometimes the belief in the plan is half the cure. Here's a final, slightly unsettling thought to carry with you into your dreams. What will the people of the future think of our medicine? A few hundred years from now, will they look back at our current practices with the same mixture of amusement and horror that we feel when we look at bloodletting? Will they be baffled by our use of chemotherapy, a practice that essentially poisons the entire body in the hope of killing the cancer faster than it kills the patient? Will they see our treatments for mental health, like prescribing daily numerical-altering drugs, as a crude and clumsy intervention, a 21st century version of the ice-pick lobotomy? This is a question that medical ethicists and historians often ponder. It's a humbling thought. It reminds us that our own modern medicine is not the final, perfect destination. It's just one more stop on the long, strange journey. We are still a part of this bizarre history. The line between a miracle cure and a barbaric practice can be frighteningly thin, and sometimes it's only visible in hindsight. The history of medicine is a story of brilliant insights and stunning errors, of quiet compassion and stunning arrogance. It's a story of humanity as relentless, fumbling, and often misguided quest to understand itself and to push back against the darkness of pain and death. It's a story of constant trial and error, of theories built, tested, and shattered. We are the beneficiaries of thousands of years of these errors, of every wrong turn and failed experiment that slowly, painstakingly, cleared the path to the knowledge we have today. So as you lie here now, feeling the gentle weight of your blankets, Let the strange parade of doctors and healers fade away. The man with the star chart, the woman with the healing herbs, the monk in his garden, the doctor with the beak, and the showman with the bottle of snake oil. They've all played their part. They've told their story. Now, there is nothing left to do but rest, safe in the knowledge that your own body, that incredible, self-minus healing machine, is quietly doing its work, a legacy of 1 billion years of evolution, far wiser than any theory we have yet devised to explain it. And now, the world of the past begins to soften at the edges. The sharp details of the anatomy theater and the bright glow of the radiant water start to fade, blending into the gentle darkness behind your eyelids. The voices of the healers and the hawkers grow quiet, replaced by the soft, steady rhythm of your own breathing. You can feel the boundary between waking and sleeping begin to dissolve, like sugar in warm water. Imagine that your bed is a calm, quiet island, and the stories we've heard tonight are just distant waves, gently lapping at the shore before receding back into the vast ocean of time. There are no more charts to read, no more dying no-seas to fear. There is only this moment of profound peace, this feeling of stillness spreading through you, from the tips of your toes to the very top of your head. You are safe, you are comfortable, you are drifting. The journey is over, the mind can rest. Let go of the day, let go of the stories, and allow yourself to sink into the deep, quiet, healing embrace of sleep. Let the current carry you into your own world of dreams, a place where you can write your own stories, free from the strange and winding path of history. The night is here to hold you. Rest now. The end of the article. Good night.